item with DHCD, and that has to do with the building code. And I've talked to you about this before. So the facility was built according to R1 standards under the building code, and that means transient housing with occupancy up to 30 days. Anything over 30 days requires adherence to the R2 standard. And we just don't know whether or not the facility meets the requirements of R2. And the only way to determine that is through a code review. And since the first day that we've known about this, the building commissioner has asked for a code review. And that item is still outstanding. But the state is looking for a certificate of occupancy, which for an R2 use. And so we are working through that issue with them. There is an opportunity for the building commissioner to provide a temporary certificate of occupancy, and that's what the state has asked. And we are still trying to understand what the intention is in terms of the code review. And again, the code review may reveal that nothing needs to happen, that the facility is in compliance, but we just don't know, because it's an older facility. It was built in the 60s and it was never reviewed for R2.
Is code review something that the owner prepares, or is it something that the building commissioner does?
So the formal process is we would ask, or the owner has been asked to submit a building permit application to kick off that code review. So the building owner is responsible for the code review, but DHCD will be undertaking this on behalf of the
so they have to
owner.
Initiate the process.
They do, yes.
So that's my question also. So when you say the building commissioner's been asking for a code review, he's waiting for DHCD to initiate the process and then he goes and inspects? I don't quite understand how it works.
Yeah, so we are waiting for the owner and or DHCD to initiate the process.
Okay.
And so when I said asking, he's been flagging it. He's identified it as an issue that needs to be attended to before he would be in a position to issue a certificate of occupancy.
And he can't go and inspect until he gets this request from them.
Yeah, and there may not even be a need for that.
Okay. And my other question is, DHCD will be providing the school children information on March 8th. And I'm guessing there's going to be less than 25 families. Well, 25 would be the maximum from what you said, that there's 25 long-term families.
At first, but then it's moving
right
up.
now, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Going forward, DHCD would like to have up to 50 families in what they're calling medium term, 2 to 4 months. And then the rest of the rooms would be for emergency.
So the information we'll get as far as the school children at Devon's won't be exactly what we will experience. We'll get a different mix of people, or are these people being moved over? I'm trying to understand how we could use the information we get from the numbers of kids at Devon's to estimate what would be the impact to our schools, both for kids coming into the schools and for kids we have to transport to their school.
So the census information we're getting on March 8th, as I understand it, is the number of school-age children that will be transitioning to the Best Western.
Okay.
Families
And will we know how many of
transitioning.
those will go to school here? Okay.
No, we won't. That
Okay.
process won't start. This is why the superintendent pushed to have that.
I bet.
The official opening date is March 13th. I don't believe I've said that yet this evening. And so she was
Okay.
pushing to get that sooner because there is a process to enroll any student. And the family will have the choice whether or not the student attends Concord Public Schools or returns to their school of origin.
Right.
But Concord Public Schools would be responsible for coordinating transportation. So we would like to get that or the superintendent would like to get that going.
Wouldn't they have to comply with the Concord Public Schools residency requirements?
Well,
in order to attend the Concord Public Schools?
they would qualify as residents in a shelter, they would qualify.
So if they're going to be here for 2 to 4 months, where do they go after that? If there's no affordable housing, I know you probably don't know the answer either, but I don't quite understand how this is. It sounds like it could be semi-permanent. I don't understand how their situation is solved after 4 months.
It's called a Band-Aid.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't have an answer for you.
Concord Village.
Is that something that MOC is supposed to figure out or DHCD is supposed to figure out? Or-
No. So MOC is the service provider, the on-site service
All right.
provider.
So DHCD is supposed to figure out how to help these families in a more permanent way.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So I did have some other things that I wanted to quickly review. We had a busy week last week with meetings. We had a very well-attended meeting on the middle school solar project. There's some information available online about that project and a couple of renderings of what that would look like that were shown and it looks like a really nice project. We also had a meeting on Warner's Pond on March 2nd. For anybody who wasn't able to attend that meeting, there is a survey that's available online if you are interested in providing some feedback about the potential future of Warner's Pond. I did want to mention that for a few days last week or the week before, Paparazzi was closed. There was an issue with a sprinkler pipe that had burst because of the cold weather. It has reopened, but we are aware that restaurant will be closing on June 30th as the lease was not renewed, and I'm not really sure if it was the building owner or Paparazzi that decided not to renew the lease. We do have a recreation open house on Wednesday, March 8th from 5 to 7:30 p.m. Purpose of that is to learn about the strategic planning process that recreation is undertaking. There is also a survey on the website for anybody who is interested in providing feedback. We do have 4 public hearings related to annual town meeting coming up this Thursday, March 9th. Finance Committee has a public hearing reviewing the education articles. Next week, March 15th, the enterprise funds, and then the final week of the month on the 27th, the continued select board public hearing, and on the 29th, the planning board public hearing. I think I'll just leave it there since I went over my time. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the town manager? Yes.
Yeah, a quick question. The Warner's Pond, I noticed, I just saw the slide deck and it looked like 2 of the options would cost maybe 3 million plus, right? We've been bankrolling, I know, some money. How much money has the town already allocated to the original dredging plan? Do you know?
Honest, I'd have to go back.
I was at the webinar. They said 2.5 million has been allocated.
Thank you.
And they also said that there are a lot of possible grants for the dam option.
For the dam option.
Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Terry.
Dam option means removing the dam.
Yes.
Very popular these days.
But there's no warrant article this year, so this is not an imminent decision, is it?
There's no warrant article.
Yeah, I don't know what warrant article would be required. I mean, only
they need
authorizing
more
additional
money.
funding.
They need
Yeah.
more money.
I believe that there's a CPC request too for this coming year,
There is.
515,000 or something. Oh, I see.
There
Diane.
is, yeah, there is for $550,000. So there is a warrant article addressing this issue. And it's item E under the CPC warrant article.
Great. So that
Okay.
brings it up to a little over 3 million. Okay. So there is. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
The only other comment about the Warner's Pond is that there will be another community forum
because they were going to incorporate some of the feedback they heard.
Yeah, I attended that and I thought it was quite eye-opening. Okay, so now moving to the chair's remarks, I did the unusual thing this week of actually titling my chair's remarks because in the wake of the second debt exclusion override that passed recently, there's been a lot of discussion about the tax burden on those that have less means. And we will be meeting with the Board of Assessors on the first week of April to discuss their ability to implement the residential tax exemption in this coming year. That would be for the FY25 fiscal year. But in the meantime, I also thought that it would be important to clarify what kinds of tax relief are already available because there are quite a few programs. They're administered by different people. And as a result, it's very difficult to just narrow down exactly what's there. And so I have actually taken a crack at just doing one page summary just for here. There will be at town meeting a much more detailed sheet that will be provided. But I think that one other thing to note is a lot of the assessors programs have a deadline of April 3rd, I think, this year. So if anyone's going to apply and get relief in the coming fiscal year, they would need to be doing that in this coming month. So as I had mentioned, there are a number of programs, many that are aimed at seniors, but not all. So the first that Concord has gotten approval through the legislature after the work of the tax Fairness Committee over many years is an up to 50% exemption for those that are over 65 and have resided in Concord for over 10 years. There are income limits, but they are, higher than some of the programs. And there also are asset and residence limits. Again, though, this is the kind of program that certainly we believe should be used more often than it has been up until now. That there are probably many more people who qualify than have taken this relief up until now. The second is tax relief that is administered by the Hugh Cargill Trust. And these are quarterly tax relief payments. Basically, they pay to help support your tax bill. You there need to own and occupy the property. There's the same income limits as the senior means tested exemption. You can take both if you qualify. And then you have the Massachusetts programs. So one of them that is also of interest is tax deferment. So with tax deferment, you actually can stop paying some or all of your taxes. They accrue 4% interest, and then they become, they're resolved with your estate. And in the end, the income limits are slightly higher than the means tested exemption, but it is another option. And then there are a number of smaller exemptions that have pretty restrictive limits by the state. There are other programs as well for blind, disabled, veterans, and others. So it's just good to know that these programs are out there. I just wanted to highlight that. The other thing to mention is I don't think that there's a lot of understanding about the residential exemption out there. And so I think that as we move forward in evaluating that, we probably should have a public process, very much like we have public processes for what we're going to do with Warner's Pond. I mean, this is a major change in taxation. So as the assessors come in and talk about their technical ability to implement the program, I think we need to, understand from them what the impact might be, if at different levels of exemption, but then B, figure out how, as a board, until the decision is made about the FY25 taxation approach, that we get into a position where the board is able to make a decision that's on behalf of the town, the will of the town, if you will. The board does have the authority to make this decision on their own, but I would caution us from just doing that in a meeting. And suggest we have a public process. So we will have more to say as we meet with the assessors, and then later this year, of course, as we face the next round of tax rates. But I wanted to at least focus on that topic, given the amount of discussion I've heard.
On all these programs, Matt, do the assessors like run fairs for like at Harvey Wheeler to discuss the options with people who are in those groups? And if you say these are underused, wouldn't it be good to run some programs where people could come and have a cup of coffee and a donut and have these options explained and have forms for them to fill out and have people there who could actually help them
Well,
out the applications?
I see Carrie going to the microphone here. Yes.
Yeah, the Board of Assessors does that on an annual basis. They have a program at Harvey Wheeler.
Great.
Yeah, but I think also the Council on Aging should socialize these programs, and we should, which is
Right.
one of the things that I'm doing tonight.
Just did.
Right. And
So-
thank you very much for putting all that together, because it is confusing. There's a lot of different programs. I know that at the last meeting of the UCargil, they were also talking about putting something together for town meeting, and I know the town manager is. So maybe, we only need one handout between the three of you.
And I didn't hand mine out.
Right.
It's just a rough summary.
And I think yours is excellent, but we need to add one more column, which would be like how you apply. Is
How to
it
apply.
assessors? Is it on the website? Is it state or whatever?
And application deadlines, yeah.
Yes.
There's also a CPC exemption.
There is.
Beyond the first
Which only
taxes.
exempts you from the payments for the CPA.
That's
Yeah.
right, but it's
But that's something,
1.5%. Yeah,
something. Yes. And so we should make sure we include that.
right, yeah, so there's one more.
But as you can see, quite a lot of
Yeah, there's a lot.
programs.
Yeah,
Probably the assessors speak to theirs, and I don't know how, much they speak to all the others, but we'll see. Okay. Now we're moving to the next item. Unless you have more.
It was, COA is already doing some of this, but you clearly need to have a much more town-wide outreach on this, because there are so many people who don't access it as a vehicle for their information.
Right.
So let me
Yeah.
just say it that way.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we'll move to the continued public hearing from February 13th, the grant of location request from Comcast Massachusetts. And do we have Mr. Greg Franks on the line?
I don't see him.
We don't see him.
Okay.
gotta love it.
Do we have anybody from Public Works?
All right.
Well, I think we are in a position where we need to continue the
Right.
public hearing again.
Okay, I'm going to move to continue the following grant of location petitions from Comcast of Massachusetts to install new coaxial cable, utility pole number 18 Plainfield Road to utility pole number 60 Ornac, utility pole number 1 Pond Street to utility pole number 29 Lawsbrook Road, and utility pole number 63 Barrett's Mill Road to utility pole number 1 Pond Street. Is there one more, or are there only three? Just three? Okay, move to continue those grant of location petitions.
To
March 20.
March 20th at 6:45 PM.
So moved.
Do I have a
Second.
second?
Yep.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So are we missing is there some kind of notification step that we're missing here that we have normally done in the past that isn't happening, or?
I don't know, but for not having the town show up either seems
Well,
problematic.
the Public Works doesn't necessarily show up 100% of the time for above ground. We haven't
Okay.
required that. I mean, they often are here,
They're
but
often here.
not always. And it has been pointed out to me that in the past that they typically didn't for above ground. And we still would need the petitioner here for the public hearing.
Okay,
So
do we need them here in person or could they,
It can be on Zoom.
No, I
Oh,
mean,
no,
you-
no.
oh, I mean, do they, or if we had a memo from the Public Works that just said that
well,
they
you do.
recommended the approval of the petition and we opened the hearing and people could come and speak in opposition or in favor, would we actually need to have the either real or virtual presence of the applicant in order to do that?
Well, it would be unusual for the applicant not to be here for a public hearing.
No, but usual is not a problem, is it?
It's your, it's up
I
to the
mean,
board.
Is it standard
Because-
procedure to notify the applicant and send them the agenda?
I sent him an email, but.
Thank you. Okay.
also
He was here at the,
Here when we continued the public.
I
hearing.
know.
Right, yes,
You know, there's only so much babysitting that we can do. So, okay.
No, but I assume what they want to do is for the benefit of the town and their subscribers. And we shouldn't have to waste a lot of time,
That's
you
right.
know, continuing it and continuing when we probably could just. So I assume it's a totally routine thing that we could just vote in favor of if unless somebody in the audience who had notice of this had anything to say. in
Well, and
objection to
that's
it.
what the hearing is primarily about.
Right. And I want to make sure that the applicant agrees to follow all the terms and conditions that Public Works has set out. So, right?
Well, they sign the application now, or the, all right, I'm just trying to make it easy, but I know it's hard to make things easy.
All right. Well, I think at this point, we have spent more time on
Right.
the deferral than we have on the. So now we're moving to the next item, the opioid fund authorization.
thank you. And we have Chris Carmody here this evening to present this item.
Okay, Chris. Mr. Carmody. Oh, here he is.
Hi, Select Board, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. We can't see, we seem to see you as a fixed image, but we heard you for a minute.
Okay, great. Thanks for making time tonight.
No,
No, it's breaking up.
Hmm.
We're,
So Chris, I can run through
Hmm.
this.
but
Can
just
you hear me now?
not really, not well.
well,
So just in the interest of time, this is the second settlement in second opioid settlement back in December 2021. The first was presented to you, and there was a request at the time for the board to authorize the town manager to enter into the settlement agreements. The first was with Johnson and Johnson. We've labeled that as Fund One. We've received $75,000 to date. And if you were in attendance at the first public hearing, you heard a warrant article that particular fund in transferring some of those funds that we've received into that. That first settlement will provide the town with $368,000 over an 18-year period. And obviously the money is coming to help set up programs to help with the opioid crisis. We have been notified of a second settlement, which we've identified as Fund Two. We have 5 different businesses, corporations that will be paying into that fund over various period of years. We don't at this point know the exact amount that the town will be receiving, but the request here is that, again, you authorize the town manager to enter into settlement agreements. These agreements are reviewed by town council, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for
Questions from the
not
board?
Showing us all of this 40 or 50 PowerPoint slides.
I could go through those if you.
And let's save them for some other time, but my question is that all this information seems to be very generic. And I wonder actually what the incidence of opioid crisis is in our particular community. Do we have any information on that?
I mean, I don't, but I'm sure the Board of Health has information that they could provide, and I'd be happy to follow up with the board.
I mean, we're going to take the money anyway, right? So that's really what we're talking about.
When we had the hearing, when I wasn't at the hearing, did we discuss how the money was going to be spent specifically?
No, not specifically. I know the Board of Health has
There are
discussed it.
categories of spend
Yeah.
that have been identified. And when in the hearing, they related, I don't know, 6 or so
Yeah.
different kinds of things that can be spent on, but they're pretty specific. They're not just any old thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are they spent through this? I mean, who actually administers the service? I mean,
Through the Board of Health.
but what do they do?
So I'm just going to see if I can pull up that slide quickly.
So
I mean, I know we're giving them this money, but how exactly do they spend it?
So in the material that we were given, there are, as Matt said, there are about 5 or 6 categories that are outlined broadly. And some of it is for direct service for mental health services and substance abuse, substance use treatment programs through local programs, which would probably include Emerson Hospital in this case and others. But there's also a number of categories that deal with youth mental health, which is both at a preventive level as well as dealing with actual problems that exist. And so I think there's those are the general categories Matt was referring to. And I know that the Public Health Board is in the process of working this out and discussing how they're going to proceed with this.
So I have the same question as Henry and Mary. I'm sure it's going to be used well, but if we could have at some point after they work it out, just maybe a 1-page summary of, what are they going to do with youth and what are they going to do with substance abuse or whatever. And are there other departments involved? And just a 1-page summary of how we're planning to use the money.
Sure.
In the longer term, I mean, I think this money will be spent. I think Terry's right. I guess my concern is that we're going to be getting this money. We're going to be offering new services. And somewhere there's an intersection between what types of care people need is provided by the healthcare system and what's provided by schools and municipalities. And that's where I think we're getting into this gray area that I don't want to start providing services that should be provided or are we should be looking to other people to other organizations.
Hi, Ms. Hartman.
So purchase services. Yeah.
Purchase those or right now, if most substance abuse is treated with personal health insurance. So, right.
Well, that's
With
one of the things
restrictions.
that we don't totally understand
Right.
about
That's what we
this.
do. Right.
Some might be provided by the schools,
Exactly.
or maybe the police department is doing more, or and also when we get grants, this is sort of like a grant. It's going to run out after a few years. Then is it going to have to go in the operating budget? And so just to get a better idea of what the program is would be great.
I've just put up on the screen the 7
Mhm.
uses.
Right. So those are general, like Henry said. And if we can find out in Concord what we're going to do, that would be great.
Harm
Um,
reduction.
Okay, so we don't need a motion on this, or do we?
You do.
Authorize the town manager to enter the subdivision and special district settlement participation forms with each of American, CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart, copies of which are included in the select board meeting packet.
Second.
Okay,
I have a
all in-
question. If we approve this, how will we find out the answers to our questions?
Well, so I will have the Board of Health or Health Director provide a 1-page summary that you've requested on how the funds will be used.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Now, let's invite the Transportation Advisory Committee to come forward. Or give us their update.
Thanks so much for having me. So my name's Laura Davis. I'm the chair of the Transportation Advisory Committee. I took over from Nick in January. So thanks for having me come in to give you an update. I'm going to give an overview of some of the issues we've been discussing. Many of these conversations are sort of in progress, so I'm looking forward to your questions and your thoughts. And you can think of some of these as a preview of things that will likely come back to you with more actionable items in the future. And also, this is an opportunity for me to gather thoughts, questions from you guys that we can use to inform our future agendas. For those who are not familiar with the Transportation Advisory Committee, our work is focused on improving our transportation systems. We're guided by Envision Concord. We've also been thinking a lot about how Rev 250 is going to be affecting the transportation systems and how we can best prepare for that so that more people can enjoy those festivities without choking up our streets and our parking lots with cars. So providing some alternative forms of transportation in preparation for that, and also in line with our sustainability principles. I'm going to take you back to the summer first, which is we went to the sidewalk sale last summer and had wonderful conversations with members of the public during that event. We found that there was very strong enthusiasm for this multimodal approach to transportation, lots of enthusiasm for the new trolley, for safe recycling infrastructure, for interconnected regional transit. That was something that came up in a number of conversations, better connections to Lincoln, to Lexington, to Acton. Some concerns that came up in a number of conversations, crossing Route 2, as you would imagine, huge barrier to walking and cycling in the town. Not enough safe cycling routes came up, infrequent and unreliable commuter rail service came up as a barrier, as was sort of the limited route and schedule for the new trolley. We did speak to a number of residents at that event who do not drive, and those conversations were particularly valuable. Elders, people who work in West Concord but don't have a car, people who have disabilities, and a lot of teenagers. So those were all great conversations to have, identifying some of those pain points. So that's sort of a little background of some of the things that has been informing our agendas and the work that we've been doing. The big thing that we're working towards is this comprehensive transportation and mobility study, which Erin has been leading us towards. And so this is a study that's going to examine, our transportation systems, assess what we have, assess where we could be going from here. That will include lots of things, including improvements in walking and cycling infrastructure, improvements in public transportation infrastructure, thinking about how all these things work together to support residents' mobility. And I can give it over to Erin if you want to say more about that. I think that
You might need the mic.
I always forget. I think that if we want to keep going and we can come back to any questions that you all have, is that the best approach?
Yeah.
And sort of,
okay.
let's do that.
All right. So running down a few more things. At our last meeting, we had a conversation about the crossing at Sudbury Road. The library director, the Friends of the Library Corporation, and a member of the library staff all wrote into the Transportation Advisory Committee identifying the crossing on Sudbury Road at Stowe Street between the parking lot and the library as a particular concern for pedestrian safety. And so we are going to be organizing a site visit. We'd like to get a lot of stakeholders there, our committee, the Historic Districts Commission, all the other stakeholders that need to be there in order for us to see what are our options there in terms of improving pedestrian safety at that location. So we're hoping for late March, early April. We're working with the library director to identify the best time for us to go and observe that safety issue that they have identified. So we're hoping that will help be a good kickoff for some of the conversations, the more in-depth conversations that we're going to have as part of the comprehensive transportation and mobility study, sort of a pilot for some of those conversations. Another thing that's happening sort of simultaneously is a Route 2 crossing study. And this is going to be more quick fixes to the Route 2 crossings. The comprehensive mobility study will hopefully have a more holistic long-term approach to that. But what can we do soon with very little money to improve safety at the Route 2 crossing, specifically at Emerson Hospital, since there are so many things that people need to access on both sides of the Route 2 there, and at 62, since that is the corridor that connects our two town centers. A few other things that have been on our agendas. You've heard a lot about the Walden and Main project, so I won't go into that. We've talked a lot about the bike share, about the trolley. The bike share, just a quick update. We do have funding for this summer, and the plan is to launch on April 1st. We want to make sure that this is very well marketed this year, so we're hoping to have this on our next agenda. How is this going to be marketed to the town, since this is a great resource for folks who want to take advantage, especially of the new Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, which will be opening this summer over Route 2. Few other updates that I think might be of interest is that there was a new law passed in January, signed into law in January. This defines vulnerable road users as roadside workers, pedestrians, people operating wheelchairs, bicycles, e-bikes, any other micro mobility device you can imagine, farm tractors, horses, etc. And the reason that this is of interest is it designates a safe passing distance of 4 feet. And the state has said that they will be installing signage. So we're keeping an eye on that. What signage will the state be installing in the town? And, will we want to create more signage or different, how are we going to communicate that effectively to our residents and our visitors? And also there is a clarification in that law about how the select board can petition the state to modify the speed limit on any state highway to protect vulnerable road users. So we're going to be looking more into the implications of that are not fully understood yet. We're waiting for some guidance on the state on how that speed limit change might be used to make changes to Concord. So that will probably come back to you at some point. And then just a preview of some things that we've been talking about and we have not come to decisions on, but these are likely to come up again. Parking minimums. I'm sure you've all heard the parking minimum, reliefs for parking, requests for parking relief. So that's been on our agenda. We've been thinking about that, looking into that, and specifically looking back on the good work that's already been done, studying parking minimums. So I did include in the meeting packet a really excellent parking policy analysis that I think is a good roadmap for where we might go from here if we wanted to make any adjustments to the parking minimums. We had an initial conversation at our last meeting about winter maintenance. So are there any modifications to our winter maintenance plan that are needed? We also have bicycle parking best practices on some future agendas as well. So that's sort of my high speed overview of the last year. Happy to take questions. And Erin's here to answer some of the more detailed questions, especially about the comprehensive transportation and mobility study.
Okay. Questions from the board. Linda, you were the first to move.
Okay. So that's a lot. Thank you very much for that high speed update there. How are you going about identifying your priorities? And I also couldn't help but notice your reference to the good work, that had been done. And I'm included in our packets today were the 2019 report. And, there were a lot of recommendations by the consultant there, some of which are very complex and difficult to implement. So how are you tackling that, I guess?
One foot in front of the other, I think is the primary answer. There's so much work that we can draw from. I mean, there's enormous recommendations in Envision Concord about, the vision that we have for the future of the town in terms of transportation. So that's been a guide. We did put together a roadmap last year, and I'm not sure if that was provided already. I think Nick gave an update last year. So we have been working off of sort of the roadmap that was established in our first year as a committee, trying to work through those agenda items. But also things have come up, such as the parking minimums that was brought to our attention from elsewhere. So a mixture of working through those agenda items and taking up timely issues as they arise.
And if I may, with just a quick follow-up. So as an example, there were a lot of recommendations in that 2019, recognizing that they were complex in terms of implementation. Have any of those moved, the zoning recommendation, other kinds of changes?
So not yet. That
Okay.
is something that we're going to be looking at. I'm working with town planner Elizabeth Hughes to start to look at what we might want to look at implementing in the future, what other towns have done, so we can sort of use those as best practices to model any changes that we might want to make off of.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go. Thank you. You're doing a lot of good work. It's exciting. I'm particularly interested in the work around crossing Route 2.
Mhm.
So you're making that safer for bicycles and pedestrians. Is that correct?
That is the
That's
hope
plan.
there. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when we had the trolley, which was focused more on tourism, right? Do you have any plans to have crosstown access beyond the trolley, or is? So giggles. So.
Yeah. We are looking at different options. We have submitted a grant that could possibly fund something, but it's something that is very much up in the air because it would be grant funded.
Mhm.
So it's certainly something that we're exploring, but we know that there is also a lot of interest in people being able to safely cross as pedestrians or as bicyclists. So we have that sort of multimodal ability. And I think that a big distinction to make is that technically it is safe now to cross Route 2, but people don't feel safe doing it. And that's a big part of it, is it's all about the perception of safety. Because even if there is technically a pedestrian island where someone can stand, if you have cars going by you going 60 miles an hour both ways, you're not going to
I know.
feel safe.
And if you're a slow walker,
Right.
I would argue.
Yes.
Don't
But-
we have a tunnel under Route 2 for turtles to go under the road?
Yes, we have
Right.
5 of them.
And is that big enough for people to walk through?
You might have to crawl.
I mean, if we can do it for turtles, why can't we do it for people?
Is the trolley done by the Economic Vitality Group? Do you work together as far as is the tourist trolley been? Do we have a grant for that again this year, or was that a one-time thing?
As of right now, we do not have funding for this year.
So
for
there will be
tourism
no
development.
cross-town transportation other than walking or bicycling.
At this point, no.
Hmm.
And I'll just add to that, the challenge with the public transit, local
Yes.
public transit option is obviously funding.
Yep.
So we are waiting. I think we'd still say that we have our fingers crossed that we might get allocated funding for the trolley again this summer through the transportation bond bill, but it's, I mean, we submitted letters and we're hoping that moves forward. I think that there is a larger conversation that needs to be had about, what are our options in
Exactly.
terms of like
Exactly.
funding public transportation?
Or how to make it self-supporting,
Mhm,
right? Which is,
mhm.
have you explored that?
That's pretty difficult.
Yeah.
Let's just say it.
Yeah,
That's-
it's
sounds,
it's incredibly difficult to make
Yeah.
public transportation pay for itself.
Okay.
The amount of subsidies that go into the MBTA and the commuter rail are enormous.
Okay.
But
Is it-
we are supposed to also hear back about the flap grant soon, which would,
Regional trolley?
yes.
Yes, great.
We're
Okay, good.
supposed to be hearing back, and then it was supposed to be several weeks ago, so we're expecting it any day.
Okay,
I'm just
Terry?
saying that when we did the trolley, when we approved the 100,000 for the trolley, it was, the conversation we had was going to be a step towards having
Mhm.
better public transportation. And it
Yes.
seems like that's kind of stalled.
Well, it just depends on grant funding. Right,
Well,
Right.
Terry?
So I really want to thank Laura and the whole TAC committee because you're taking on all of these different projects, which is the vision that Jane Hotchkiss had on the select board 4 or 5 years ago when I first got on the board. And I've had the honor and the privilege of seeing TAC really progress under Nick and Aaron and now Laura. And the fact that you're having these larger conversations and you're starting to really think through the strategies. Because Mary's right, what is going to be self-sustaining with all of these projects, like Route 2, that's going to be expensive. What can we do short term? So I think that you're really moving in a very positive direction. And I'm really glad that the committee is working so hard on all of these things. A specific issue that I voted on when I first became a member of the select board was the speed limits. We voted that everywhere in town, the speed limit was 25.
That's the minimum, the default. Yeah.
No,
But-
no, the maximum.
Well,
But then we were immediately overruled by some state laws, so that it is incredibly confusing on some of our main streets now. You go and it's 25, and then 100 feet later, it's 35, and 100 feet later, it's 40, and then it's 25 again, and nobody knows what's going on. And so I'm really happy to hear that you're going to be clarifying with the state. What can the select board do? Does our previous vote mean anything at all? Should we re-vote it? What do we do? That would be really useful to know. Thanks.
I have recently gotten some clarification that I just received today, so I haven't quite gone through it all, but I'm hopeful that it'll provide us more clarity with what we can and cannot do and what our options are moving forward.
Oh, great. Please let us know.
Okay.
okay. Other questions? from the board?
Is the commuter rail a viable way for people to go back and forth between Concord Center and West Concord? Is there a sufficient frequency, and is the cost at all reasonable to do that?
So I think that frequency on the commuter rail is something that all kinds of commuters would like to see improved, but that's obviously sort of outside our jurisdiction. We can advocate for a more frequent service, but that's the MBTA. You can absolutely travel between Concord and West Concord on the commuter rail. It's only once an hour during peak service. On the weekends, it's 2-3 hours. In the evenings, it's virtually non-existent. It's about $2.75 to travel between Concord and West Concord. And I do know there are people who do it frequently. We encountered several of those people at the sidewalk sale this summer. So that is being used as a connection point between the two town centers, but it is not very frequent. And it is, rather expensive to $2.75 both ways. If you were, using it for getting to work on a daily basis. Yeah.
Okay. I was curious about your Route 2 crossing focus because, we now have this emergency family shelter coming in. And so there's that Baker Ave extension crossing. And so it seems like that might be taking a look.
We had already submitted doing the study, what we found out about that. Unfortunately, the bridge that crosses Baker Ave extension over from Elm Street to Baker Ave extension is not created with possible for sidewalks. We don't necessarily want to be encouraging people by putting in extra infrastructure to cross over that direction because we're looking at really sort of low cost, simple, quick fixes for crossing. So I think that would be a much larger conversation to look at how to do this safely, because we certainly don't want to be putting people in a position where they're then walking half in the road and half. I don't even know if there's a wide enough shoulder there for somebody to really walk safely. So,
as somebody who bikes across it, I can say that there definitely is. I think that this is the conversation about how we can improve transportation infrastructure for folks at Best Western is something that we will have on future agendas. Fortunately, it's not that far from the Concord Center train station. It's about I think it's about a 40-minute walk. It's or maybe 25 minutes. It's 11-minute bike ride. I do know that. So it is you can go in the opposite direction, but that Baker Avenue crossing, there is not a quick fix, I think is what the point is. There's not an easy quick fix. There's not space there. And I did do the Safe Routes to School day with the kids that cross Route 2 at that intersection. So I did get to see a crossing in action there this year, and that required a police detail in order to get the kids across safely. So it's a very difficult intersection.
Well, that I also just thinking ahead, if the Assabet River footbridge becomes a reality, that will also be routing more, foot traffic and bicycles in that general direction.
Absolutely.
Do you know the timing of that? When is that supposed to be completed?
When's what's supposed to be completed?
The Assabet Bridge.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I think that we're still waiting on some funding, and I don't think the
Yeah,
final
it
design
still
has been
has to
completed.
be on the
It's still-
tip, right?
Yeah.
It's
It's not on the tip yet.
right.
Still funding for planning, right?
We funded the whole design,
Yeah.
but it's now got to be implemented. Yeah.
I do want to mention that I believe that Mass DOT is currently undergoing a study of at-grade crossings for Route 2, which they didn't relay to us until I reached out to them to ask about something else. So they will be looking at crossings, the safety of crossings at the Rotary, which scares me a little bit, but places like the Best Western at Elm Street, further up towards Walton, to make sure that those are crossed at the minimum basis.
There are people that cross there. I've
Yes.
seen them and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So, okay. The other question I had was, can you remind me of the scope of the town study? So
Sure.
it's, dollars and time frame and all of that.
Yes. So we just put out the RFP. I just started getting people asking for it today, which is exciting. We are looking to spend up to 100,000 on the study. That is what we put our cap at currently. That is based on what other towns have done recently. Arlington had theirs in 2019 and theirs was 80,000, I believe. So we're expecting it'll be of similar scope, but several years down the line.
Sure.
Expecting it to probably take about 18 months from start to finish. Some of the things that we're looking to get are sort of a baseline inventory of what we have already. Laura has already started work on that. So we already have some of that, but we want to build off of it to make sure that we have all of that. We want to have an action plan that will provide us with things to do, but also what are sort of our low hanging fruit? What can we do that is low or no cost to help really make those connections quickly, to help people really have that multi-mobility option? We want to have a really robust community engagement plan and process. So that'll be a big part of it, to make sure that people are involved and that we're not just listening to people who happen to gather their neighborhood and come to a meeting, but we're really reaching out and talking to as many people as possible. We want to come up with a priority list of projects. We have one that we can sort of use as a jumping off point from the complete streets, but we also know that that's not a complete listing of all the projects that need to be done. We don't think we're going to get every single project in Concord because things are constantly changing and there could be a new development that goes in that completely changes a neighborhood or something like that. But we want to get sort of a list that we can really move off of. We want a best practices design manual that will help sort of guide us going forward. So we know what if we have something arise, we can say, okay, here's the things that have been designed for Concord. This is based off of what we've had before. This is best practices and this is it combined. So we really have a design manual for moving forward. We want to be looking at the possible impacts of trails and natural resources. If we're encouraging people to walk along trails more often or to use them as connection points, we want to make sure we're not doing anything that's going to be degrading the land or causing any additional issues. And that's something that's really important to us. We want to have recommendations on strategies for what grants to be going after, and if there's specific orders that we should be doing, things like that. Some of these consultants are going to have just more expertise in looking at all these different things and where to get this information. And also we want to be getting grant opportunities from them. They may be aware of things that we aren't. We typically look to the state's website and to specific organizations that we know provide grants towards transportation, but there could be others out there that we're just not aware of right now. And also that will be providing basic sort of planning level cost estimates, which is something that is needed in order to go out for grants. We have to have something to base our numbers off of. So that's the sort of basic of what we're trying to get out of this, which is, I know, a lot.
Okay. I also had heard that, our current, when we were reviewing the roads program in the finance committee hearing, that we're at about a $20 million deficit of spend for just the road maintenance. How do you imagine we will go after these programs, given that, for example, just on the roads front, we're already kind of behind the 8 ball?
I think that Laura put it really well when she said we're just putting one foot in front of the other. I think we're going to have to be very strategic about what we're looking at. If, for instance, we can get a grant to put in a beautiful, pedestrian crosswalk and crossing signals and 20 feet of pavement on each side, and it's beautiful and new and shiny. We want to make sure that there are those connection points. We don't want to be making things sort of in a vacuum. And we want to be prioritizing what we're doing to create those connections and to improve the safety. So there could be some things that, we can't get to for a while, but we're going to be prioritizing the low hanging fruit first so we can make those connections possible.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a comment. As I'm listening to you, I'm hearing, God, this is so broad. And there's so many touch points that you have.
Mhm.
You've got Bruce Fruin Rail Trail. You've got the tourism, right? You've got
Planning board.
the planning board. You've got the Assabet River. There's just so many touch points. And how are you going?
It's a big job.
Yeah. How are you going to make sure that you touch all those places so that you can really do a broad look? I mean,
Well, I think that this is one of the reasons why we're doing this comprehensive transportation and
Okay.
mobility study. Our agendas for the TAC have been, we can only take on so much at a time and only engage so many stakeholders just because of limited volunteer capacity. So we're hoping that having the consultants on board will help us be able to take that broader view and engage way more stakeholders than we can do on our own. So that's part of it. And I do think that, although there are a lot of different stakeholders, I think that there are ways to do a phased approach. There are sort of segments within that are manageable to work on, sequentially. So we shouldn't have to wait until, we shouldn't have to wait to take action until, we're all done.
okay.
If I could just note, I'm looking at the 10-year capital plan beginning in fiscal 26, which I know is a little ways out. We started including funding on an annual basis for pedestrian safety and bike improvements, starting with 300,000 and going to 600,000 over the 7 years. So that's a few years out. And there's a little bit of funding for some specific projects, which
And then grant fund.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have 100,000 in fiscal 25,
But
not 24.
2026, you're not going to have any capital.
We'll see. Okay, other questions for the TAC, as I hear it referred to?
No, thank you. Great
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, I mean, I really look forward to the study, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's a good time to be, I think, looking at transportation in town.
Long overdue.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really great that you're working on it. Thank you.
And if I can just say, we also have 2 openings. So if anybody out there in the public would like to dive into a really exciting and meaty topic, we are looking for 2 more committee members to join our group.
Okay, great.
It's an opportunity.
It's an
Yeah, and-
opportunity.
And
It
what
is.
skills are you looking for?
I mean, we would like we'd like people who are excited to jump into these topics and take a holistic view. So not look at it just as a pedestrian, just as a cyclist, just as a driver, but really be able to look at something and say, okay, well, how are all the different users going to use this infrastructure? So we're looking for worker bees and transportation nerds. So that's kind of
Right, so
our ideal candidate.
public policy, urban planning, transportation.
Yeah, all of the above. And, there's a lot of, sustainability stuff in there. So there's a lot to take on here.
Okay. All right, thanks
Yep.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we will turn to 2229 Main Street. And Carrie, you have something you'd like us to discuss?
I do, and we have people here. If you want to
Yeah,
call them up,
sure.
we have people from our
2229
Main Street
and
Oversight Committee and our NMI.
Chair NMI Star Met Emeritus.
Yes,
Okay,
Right.
well,
Thank you.
I noticed that the absence of them except in our packet tonight.
so
Yeah.
if I can just make a very brief remarks. So just to remind the board, we discussed this topic I think about 6 months ago. And I was charged with trying to put together a draft for a potential task force. And I did contact both committees, and they gave wonderful insights and comments. So I wanted to thank everybody who commented. When we met before, we weren't sure whether we wanted to have one committee to do everything. And the more comments I got back, it started to become clearer that, and so the way I've drafted this is that this new task force would be charged with deciding whether the town should acquire the property, and if so, how, when, and under what conditions. And that would include potential uses, potential risk, liability, timing, institutional controls, liens, and other legal matters. So that's a big job. And then the current 2229 Main Street Oversight Committee would then implement and manage the plan with the specific institutional controls. So that's the way this draft is written. And I still have comments saying it's too much work for one committee. So whether we need to pare it down or not. So those are my remarks. And maybe you want to hear.
Well, I think the first question I just have for you is to distinguish this committee from the NMI Star Met
Right.
that had been there before.
Right, good point. So the NMI Star Met Committee, as I understand it, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but did a lot of public outreach, a lot of charrettes and things in public forums where the public weighed in on uses, and then submitted their final report to the select board in 2021, and it is on the town website. This committee, though, this new task force would have a specific time frame and make some really strong recommendations. Okay, because town meeting has already approved that the select board can acquire this site. So now, are we ready to acquire it? What more information do we need? Well, we need to find out whether to acquire it. Is it ready? How, when, and under what conditions? Like I said, what are the potential risks? And as Paul pointed out, or Gary, I forget which person pointed this out, but what are the risks of not acquiring it? What about liability, timing, institutional controls, liens, and other legal matters? So there's a lot of things, not just the uses that were done, but what are the action steps that
Okay,
need
because
to be
I
done?
seem to recall from the report, there was a chapter on risks, for example.
Mhm.
So again, I don't know that we need to tread over all of that same territory.
Right.
Hopefully we're going into new territory here of just the sort of how aspect, right?
Oh, some people are,
How and whether.
yeah, some people are ready to acquire it now, and others are still thinking it over. And I'm in that second camp. I would like more information about risk and liens and timing and liability. I'm not ready to vote today, in other words.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this task force is more or less to get you in a position where you could vote, or us
And the
in a
public.
position where,
It's
And the
almost
public,
like
yeah.
the transportation or the residential exemption. We want to make sure the select board isn't acting in a vacuum, that the public understands
Yeah.
what's
okay.
going on.
That was a condition of the article that approved the acquisition of the property, that we have a public hearing.
Okay.
That was a
Yeah.
condition.
I think we have held that since then.
Did that satisfy that, do you think?
Well, we've had a number of public meetings. I don't know.
I don't know if the select, well,
I think we
I
would
mean,
need
that
another
said,
one.
I do agree. There are still a lot of loose ends.
Right. I
right.
think we would
And-
need another public hearing to talk about, this is our proposal for how we're going to acquire it, when we're going to acquire it. We'll talk about risk again, talk about the liens. A lot of this stuff isn't even settled yet. So we're not even ready to have that public hearing.
so did we or didn't we already have a public hearing that talked about these things, like the liens and the risks? Or was the public hearing more about ideas for reuse?
I think it almost doesn't matter
I just-
that we are going, if we
It was
approve this,
reuse.
we're going to go ahead and we'll have another
Okay,
meeting.
okay,
Right.
Okay, so,
okay,
um,
good. I think,
All right.
I think we need.
Is is a vote in the 2015 sufficient authorization in another fiscal year to acquire this property? Or would, at least if there was any expense involved, appropriations or?
well, I think appropriations would have to be settled separately,
Mhm.
right? But
But
I
is
think
our
the vote
assumption-
was very open-ended. Because it imagined that this would not be an immediate action.
Okay, but
Right.
can we act based on that vote?
I
as a
think it's
board?
specified that the select board can act if and when the property is cleaned up to a residential standard.
That's right.
And at that point, it wasn't. But we're getting close now. Are we there yet? Or no, we're still not
Okay.
even there
Well,
yet.
I see the threshold issues. Threshold issue is the risk and liability.
Mhm.
And I think until we have resolved those issues, there's no point talking about what we could do with it. Because if it's too hazardous for us to own it, it doesn't matter what can be done with it. And I think we're not really, even though those issues have been dealt with to some extent in earlier studies, I think it's pretty obvious we're not really satisfied with what we have, the conclusions that we've reached about the risk and the continuing liability. And so my inclination would be to say, I don't think that we need 3 years and 7 people to deal with that issue. I mean, I think that if we wanted to know whether or not we wanted to go forward with it, we could have a task force for 6 months that would get the best answers they can from our, hire a consultant, an environmental consultant, hire somebody, an attorney who is skilled in environmental liability issues, and get us an answer. And if we can't get it in 6 months, I don't think we can get it. So, I mean, and my concern is that it is really not like a commercial development, because if the town owns it, the town owns it forever. We're not gonna get our money out and, sell it in 30 years to different investors after all the risk is gone. 50 years, 100 years from now, if there is leaks of polluted groundwater that affects other communities, there's an emerging area of law where we have class action suits brought by plaintiffs. And there was one, I think it was against the town of Hudson recently, where we might have ongoing and very substantial liability of ownership of this property. And I think I would want us to have a high level of confidence that the risk is low and that the legal, the legal jeopardy of the town is not something that we have to be concerned about. The way we had to deal with the Grace property that we acquired for the school buses. And so I would like to see the answer to that first, and I don't think that's something that will take us a long time to do. And it doesn't make sense to me to spend 3 years coming up with an answer to these questions.
Well, maybe we should ask the folks that have been working on these issues how they would see that process. So can I turn to?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this.
You can identify yourself.
Well, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Paul Boehm, 11 Ridgewood Road, former co-chair of the reuse committee. I think we're here to collectively to try to advise the select board down the road to make a decision. I think that decision is kind of multidimensional. First, you have to say, why should we acquire the site in the first place? What's the opportunity? Even before you get into how to acquire it and what the liabilities are. And then what are the risks and how to communicate to the public that it's safe. So those three parts, in my mind, what are we going to do with the site? Is it worth acquiring it to make a decision? How are we going to do that legally and to understand the liabilities, the liens, the financial issues, and then to communicate to the public on risk. I think those are the three tracks that I think Terry tried to capture in the charge. And I think those are the appropriate three tracks. You could do 3 separate committees to look at each one of those. But I think the integration of a committee that maybe has subcommittees that looks at all those, because they have to kind of move in parallel. So at some point, you, the select board, or your successor group, can make a decision. And based on those 3 issues, why are we going to acquire it? How do we acquire it with the appropriate liability protections? And how do we communicate to the public that it's safe? I think that in my mind, those have been the 3 prongs. And the report that the reuse committee put together was sort of the first attempt at covering those 3 bases, early attempt. We didn't come to conclusions on any one of those. And I think what the charge basically says is this committee should come to recommendations, firm recommendations on all 3 of those so that you can make a decision on if and how and when to acquire it.
And then how long do you think it would take
To do what?
to come to that point of recommendations?
Your charge wants a report by October 31st of 2024. I think that could be initial recommendations based on conversations, but I think it's going to take probably 2 years to cover all of those issues. Now, town council has been working on some of those.
Yeah.
We have to schedule public meetings. I think a lot of that information is available, but to come up with a reuse plan, that involves potentially talking to third parties. Are there partners in this? How to do that? Because it's not just we want to put a field here. You want recommendation how to do that, and I think the committee needs to be in a position how to do that. And those are specifics that are going to take
And
like more than a year.
So, because I guess one of my thoughts was that the NMI StarMet committee did talk about the kind of why would you want to acquire, and that we've already kind of done the opportunity analysis to some degree.
Right.
And that secondly, I don't know that we need you're not talking about getting a bid to put in the field, but you're talking about like, what type of contract would you need or something like this. I think those are smaller details. I think that again, we know that there's potential opportunities here for recreational use, both passive and active, that there's even some potential housing use, that there's other municipal uses that could be envisioned at this site. So I think that the opportunity's been kind of proven. It's more of like, okay, now how would we actually get to that point, of
Right.
having that happen?
It depends on the level of detail that you need.
Right.
Yeah.
And also the town acquires it, but there are costs and infrastructure development. What are those costs to the town after
Yeah.
acquiring it and actually developing it for certain purposes?
Yeah.
So it really, to answer your question on how long it's going to take, depends on the level of detail. Right now we have a report.
Yeah, we have a report,
We have a
but I
report.
have to say that since that report was issued, we've kind of then stalled. I mean, that we're continuing to monitor the site, the cleanup, but in terms of making progress on coming to a decision,
Right.
we seem stuck. Yes,
Can I
Mary.
say something? I think that what the disposition of this site is probably the most important decision that this select board's going to face for the next few years. I really think that. And I think for me, I think that we've done, the reuse committee report did a good job, as Matt said, as far as looking at potential uses. So I don't think we have to redo that ground. I do think that the sticking point, though, for me as a member of this select board is a thorough analysis of the risks of doing it and the risks of not doing it. That's what and I think that's what the community is asking for as well. So to me, if we could do something that's focused on that and do it quickly but thoroughly, then I think that's the important next step to get this kind of unwedged.
So Mary, when you talk about the risk of doing it and not doing it, does that also include what it would take to implement any kind of?
To me, that's the next step. To me, it's
So there's so much more than just risk and liability in trying to assess, I think, about the decision point that I think you're after and the public is after. And that is, very detailed work in terms of the liens, all the liens on that. What are all the steps involved in that? What is it going to cost to go through all those steps? And once we go, and those steps are also going to reveal a lot of information about liability and risk as well, because there are some provisions at the government levels for assuming some of that risk. And we know that in a general way, but we don't know that in the specifics of it.
Right.
And I think we need to be schooled in the specifics of it, but we're going to need those specifics to go to the public. And it's also going, one of my reactions when a lot of good work went into this, a lot of work and a lot of bases are covered in this. But one of my reactions to this was that, first and foremost should be somebody with communications expertise as a baseline requirement for this committee, even if you are paying for some of that service vis-a-vis any consultant that might be brought in. But there's a whole, there's some pretty specific process kinds of things of just, if we were to even to get to the point of whether we take this on or don't take this on, what does that really entail at a detail level? And I think you've tried to capture some of that work in your charge.
Can I just say something about risk?
Yeah.
When you talk about risk, there are really two types of risks. There's the financial and liability risk to the town, but then there's the health risks to the public that public perceives. Those both have to be addressed under risk.
Right. And that was what I was going to say. So I want to respond to some of these comments. So Paul, you mentioned 3 tracks: the liens and the legal, the risk communication, and why acquire it. And I do agree that the reuse committee did an excellent job of giving us some great ideas about the potential and why we might acquire it. And now I agree with Mary. We should focus now on both types of risk that you just mentioned, Paul. The liens and the liability and the public health, they're related and they both need to be studied and communicated to the public in a lot, and to the select board.
Yes.
I mean, and to everybody more than
I
we've
do
done
think
so
we
far.
do need a recommended plan or use,
Right.
because otherwise you can't really address some of the
But-
other things.
One
we don't
thing-
need that now.
We don't need-
Well, except for that, like risk, that idea of health risk or something
No,
depends
because-
in part upon the use.
But what I've
But you
heard,
could
Matt,
say it
is
as the health risk means that some uses disqualify some uses for some part of the land.
right.
But it doesn't have to commit us to, or even prioritize use.
No, it'd be a recommended plan.
And what
anyway.
I've heard is an
already
idea
have
of
that.
phasing it in. So phase one would use one area. And, there's
This is where-
another area that we're never going to use.
But NMI had three different plans, right? There was three different scenarios that were
Options.
described. They were options.
For the reuse.
Yes.
Yes, I know.
And so we'd be moving beyond that to, okay, we're just, here's the recommended use
No, I'm
approach.
saying at this point in time, we're not even talking about recommended uses.
Right.
Because we've
But
kind of done that.
You kind of have to build
I don't
everything
think
else
you do.
around
I
that.
don't think you do. I think we can look at what are the risks? What are both the legal risks, the lien risks,
Mhm.
the health risks? What are the risks to the town of maybe not doing it?
Right.
And leave that, just, let's start there.
I agree.
Let's just stop there and say, okay, and then let's talk to the town. Let's have a hearing and say, should we take this land or not? And then from there, we can talk about, now that we have the land, what is the best use for various, do we phase it? What do we put here?
Mhm.
That's when that conversation happens. But having that conversation, we've had enough of that conversation in the abstract way. Now we need to really focus on, are we going to take ownership or not?
Right.
Pam.
So I wanted to point out that
you might want to reduce
Pam
yourself.
Rockwell, 1810 Main Street, and chairman of the 2229 Main Street Oversight Committee, which hasn't met in a while. So I wanted to point out that it's really hard to figure out the use for this site if nobody's sure we're going to have it yet, is part of the problem. We have things like the Recreation Commission doing their report. We have groups doing that. They don't really trust that it's available until we say, hey, we're willing to actually take it. So I actually think that this first section of duties and responsibilities, section 2, which basically says we get the legal in order, we get the money in order, and we get the risk communication done, is the really first important step to do, and is the report that we need,
Mhm.
because that will solve the problem of you not being sure about the risks thing.
Right.
And Mr. Dane being not understanding that, hey, unlike every other property that has all kinds of toxic problems in it that we own across our town, like fuel waste and landfill at the high school, and we have plenty of properties where we could have long-term liability associated with them. We have a dam on Warner's Pond that could flood people. I mean, there are all kinds of issues that we have. This is the one case where we have somebody else to fall back on for the liability. We have other people that are responsible for problems at this site, and they will always be responsible for the problems at this site. They will always be paying for
See, that's exactly what
that
we-
kind of communication is a really important piece. And so focusing on that duties and responsibilities number 2 that you've got there, that's the big thing that this committee is doing. The other things in there are nice. It's nice to communicate with people who might want to have a need for this. It's nice to be up to date on the legal and the what's happening at the site at this minute. But the biggest thing we want this committee to do are the things listed under number 2, and that's the report we want, and that's the communication with the public.
But I
that we
mean, if
want.
there's, for example, item 7, where, see if there's funding opportunities, grants,
You mean
Work
like the
through it.
tag ground we have for actually
Yeah,
doing this risk communication?
Let's focus on the most important thing in front.
Can I try to convince you that you can't do the risk without considering?
you can try.
consequences?
I don't know if you're going to succeed.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Well, the site is not a uniformly contaminated site. There are sites that were heavily contaminated, sites that were never contaminated. So you can do something in an uncontaminated area that you couldn't do in a contaminated area,
Right.
and vice versa.
Right.
So to talk about risk, the reuse committee, we apportion this into several areas.
Yep.
And the tag grant that the town has acquired, I'll call it a use specific risk assessment. We're going to ask the committee, and this Chris Carmody is trying to hire somebody now. We're going to ask that consultant to look at those areas of the site and describe what are the risks of doing X, Y, and Z at that area. Let's look at another area. What are the risks over here? So, you can't talk about risk at the entire site because the contamination is varied and the reuse opportunities are varied. Practically speaking, you have to talk about different areas of the site and different uses. So I think that those two pieces logically fit together. And
So how nailed down do we have to have the reuses in order to do a thorough risk analysis?
I think it has to be, it's just kinds of uses. It's not really,
it's kind of
Yeah.
like area was never contaminated. What can we do there? We can do affordable housing. We can do anything. We could dig at that area. There's another area that maybe just playing fields because you can't go below the surface. There's another area that we can't touch because
Right.
of institutional controls.
But we already have that detailed really well in the report from 2021, right? It
No,
lists
no.
each area and
Yeah.
some possible uses and what we can and cannot do
To some
there.
extent, yes.
And I agree with Mary that we don't have to know right now, is it going to be a soccer field or a baseball field, for example, or, you know, that's too much detail. We just need to know, are we safe and free from liability? I didn't know the town of Hudson had gotten sued. I want to hear more about that, you know, that kind of stuff.
The liability that Henry's talking about, absolutely, it's site-wide. That you have to talk about that type of financial risk. I'm talking about the health risk is very much segmented depending on what you do. And that's why we have to think about
Mhm.
risk in different areas.
Right. We have to
Okay.
figure out all the different types of risk.
Financial risk, the risk to the town in acquiring the site is
Right.
a holistic effort.
Right. There are some people asking if we can get insurance or not. All of that has to be written down as to what the facts are.
Right.
Now I understand Linda's recommendation that we gotta get a communications person on your task force, because it seems like, it seems like we need to understand, we need this decision point to acquire it or not. We've got some considerations that go across the entire site. We have some considerations that we only have to worry about for specific uses of specific portions of the site, right? So I'm almost like feeling like there's this chart or something that you could put together that would say, you know, for these specific uses,
It's a matrix.
yes, you see,
Yeah.
I'm trying to envision
a
something
matrix.
that communicates to us and to the town,
Right.
what are the risks? How do we mitigate them, or how do we cover ourselves, or how do we prevent them by restricting certain uses, maybe in certain areas, and frame it in a way that we can make a decision.
But the matrix doesn't apply to the financial risk and liability. That's a site-wide issue. That's a broad issue.
Okay, so then maybe that's the separate thing, right?
And then
But
all the
also
steps
do we-
involved in the legal piece of it, in terms of unwinding all the liens.
And that's the
and-
broader, so those are the overall risks.
Right.
Do we
But then-
know what will happen to it if we decline to take ownership? Do
There,
we?
the
Is
risk
there-
of
I
not doing
mean-
it.
It's a different type
What?
of risk.
That's the risk of not doing it.
No, but I know, we don't know what, if there is another taker out there or not. I mean, it's a lot easier to be objective about it if we know it's just going to sit there until we're ready to take it over. And it's a different situation if there's an urgency that arises because there are other options that
Yeah.
for other entities might use it for other things. Or it might be sold or transferred to, somebody
Who owns
else.
it now?
We don't really know, do we?
It's
Then how
it's
can
an
it be
or,
sold?
it's called an orphan site. It doesn't, it's a bankrupt owner.
Okay, so then how
It's
can
not
it be
even
sold?
clear.
So we need a meeting with town council to understand that question. What are her options for acquiring the site? Is it eminent domain? And there's negotiations with EPA going on, and there's all of this.
Okay.
It's complicated, and I don't pretend to understand it right
well, and
now.
I actually think it'd be great to have the task force work through that
Yes,
with
Yeah.
council.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
it's a, yeah.
But that's
we're
not going to
trying
take,
write it
that's
down.
not going to take 3 years, I hope.
Well, first of all, I don't think anybody's talking about 3 years.
That's what this
Okay,
committee.
I want to explain about that because I drafted the charts. There are 2 dates. If you look at number 10, it says they're going to prepare the draft report for submission to the select board on or before October 31st, 2024.
Right.
Now,
It's a year and a half.
that's just thing I pulled out of the air.
Right,
We can decide what date we really want in there.
But that's like more or less 18 months.
It's an 18-month
Right.
thing, the way I have it. Now, the reason you're seeing 3 years, Henry, is in another section under membership where we were just trying to get staggered terms. So it says the term of office shall be 3 years or until the acquisition is complete, whichever comes
But I
first.
mean, okay, I almost think we should just. The
Cross
task
that
forces
out.
you normally, just you do your report and you
Right, you're
disband the
done.
task force.
You don't
Right.
stagger.
So maybe it'll just say, or until the report is complete, not the acquisition is complete.
Because that could be a long time, depending.
Well, but I think it's realistic in 18 months to have a set of recommendations.
Yeah.
With certain caveats, assumptions that, yeah,
I
absolutely.
I
18
think
months?
that
Hmm?
that's,
You need 18 months?
Well, depends when the task force gets started.
So,
well,
well, if they're ready earlier, even better.
yeah, that's true. This is a deadline. They could wrap up their work next spring.
What's the likelihood of that?
Right.
You know,
You tell us,
you know?
All
tell
the
us when you need.
task forces we gave extensions to, right? Civil War,
Oh,
fiber, personnel, they all got
I
extensions.
think this is
So-
18 months is a good time frame.
Yeah. So if a key piece of this is also defining and unwinding what all the legal pieces are in this, you're talking about a significant budget, and has that budget been considered where that money is going to come from in this time frame?
Well, I think that we will have a discussion of the legal budget later this evening. And I
But
believe
it's
that
not
the
built
legal,
into, I assume it's not built into the FY24 budget.
I,
That's,
I was,
No.
It's not. but-
it's not as a line item. Yeah.
the risk communication, isn't that part of the tag grant?
That grant's going to cover
Everything except legal.
But, okay, I don't
The what?
understand about the tag grant. It's only $20,000.
I know.
It seems to me it's not going to do all of these different things. We're
Yeah.
going to need another grant. I think it's.
Or we shrink the scope of this task force.
I think that you have two major expenses. You have the expenses of the legal expenses, which you're going to talk about later, and you have the risk communication expenses, and that's having your meetings. And it's not as expensive as you,
When you say having your meetings, you mean the hearing for the public?
the hearings with the public, yeah. And that whatever communication issues are involved in getting information back and forth. If you have to do a survey, if you have to do, some event to get the information out there to people about.
Once a
Carrie, who-
consultant is hired for the tag grant, this matrix that we talked about, that's his or her scope in the matrix. And all the information is there. It's in various reports for somebody to pull together. So it's not a heavy lift in terms of time
So a year would be more than enough.
for that piece.
Well, for most of it. I mean, you know how, doesn't matter for most jobs, how long you have to do it. It always gets done the week before the deadline.
Well, I'd
So-
say
So
if the select
so if
board-
you have a year and a half, it'll take a year and a half. If you have a year, it'll take a year. If you have 6
I don't
months,
think-
it'll take 6 months.
So I don't think it can get done before October of 2023. And
Four.
if you do it, no, I'm saying 2023, doing it before October, putting the deadline in there as being before October 2024 at this point, October 2024 is kind of where you need to be if you need to appropriate or put something on town meeting agenda, right?
Yeah.
So if you
that's
think
the
about
thing
it
is
that way, there's no,
That's a good.
I mean,
point.
we could always come up with it earlier, but
Yeah, I think that that's a good way to look at it. It's really what is the deadline that would be actionable?
And
Right.
also, it's not
That's
going
good.
to be cleaned up in the next 3 months or 6.
Clean by October 2024, won't be totally clean.
Right. So it's,
Then that's a good date.
yeah, I mean, it's not, Henry, even if the report was done, it wouldn't be cleaned up and ready to go by then.
I mean, I'm just thinking that it still doesn't hurt to know what the answer is sooner rather than later. I never heard of a report that was filed early.
Can I share with you a little secret?
What's that?
If the select board tells this committee when you want to make a decision, the committee will give you recommendations by that we'll pace ourselves because the information is there.
Well, the budget cycle matters, as you're pointing out, Linda.
The budget for the committee's work is probably the outside counsel is if the committee's going to interact with the outside counsel, that's an expense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One
That
thing
is an
about-
expense.
one
And
thing
that's
about-
what I mean is, while it isn't a line item in our budget, I would hope it's not going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, to do.
The outside counsel has already given you sort of a template, sort of the same
Right.
type of thing that our committee, here are the possibilities. The town council should be asked, in my opinion, how do we acquire the site with minimum liability?
Mhm.
You come
Right,
back
more
and
specific.
do that. That's a very
Yeah,
specific
right.
charge.
And I think that, again, it's in the realm of the types of things that we request town council to do ad hoc. I mean, it's bigger
Mhm.
than some tasks, but it's not as
Yeah.
huge as others. It could come out of the general fund.
Yeah.
for
And I know that he's already started working on it. He's already started negotiating
Yeah,
with
so there's
Mina,
some money.
Mina with EPA.
Terry, I have a question about the membership of
Yeah.
the committee. I think it's kind of unfortunate that when we write these, we describe members as members of other committees. So we always try to, and rather than looking at the skill set that we need. So I wonder if there's a way we could redo the membership to identify the skills that we need. Because, for example, we are saying we need someone from the NRC, and I'm not really sure what is the skill that we're hoping to get from that person.
Mhm.
It's a suggestion.
Right. So do you like this type of thing? One or two citizens at large with expertise in relevant fields such as hydrology, environmental law, public health, toxicology, brownfields remediation, or engineering?
I also think that it's really nice to have people on the committee that are members of other committees because they actually know some of the needs in the town.
Yeah,
Oh.
there's a learning curve
Okay.
that some of the old committee members don't have learned. They're there. Some of the new members will have a learning curve.
So you want people from other committees,
So-
like someone from the NRC.
It is.
I think a combination, the way Terry put it, somewhere along those
Okay,
lines. makes a lot
well,
of sense.
why tie our hands though? And we do this with a lot of committees. When, as a select board, we're making appointments to committees. Why don't we just look at the qualifications of people who are available and make the decisions based on not predetermined things like one from the planning board, one from the Concord.
No, but
Museum,
just
one
as
from the-
Pam has said,
Huh?
because interconnectivity of these committees can be very helpful.
Well, but then we can make that choice when we make the appointments.
As long
We
as you
don't
make it
have
so
to
someone can
predetermine-
serve on
We
this
don't have to
committee and other
predetermine
committees.
where they come from. We look at them and then you can decide whether these are the people you want
Task force
and
committee.
whether they're the best people to do the job. And rather than say you have to squidgy it around so you get the right.
So you would need an App 10 exclusion basically for participation in the task force in that case.
No, because we have lots of committees like.
Well, no, I mean, if you
CPC.
don't call out a member
Oh.
being from here or there,
Oh,
if instead it's at large, but you could potentially have somebody that's from a committee, then you need an App 10 carve out.
okay.
So,
Okay.
in this case, the learning curve is extremely steep, but we have a lot of expertise on the existing committees, or one committee was just disbanded. A lot of expertise and people who have really dug deep into this area. So I think having some of that talent carry over is extremely important. But having said that, as I look the way the membership section is written right now, it is possible that 5 of the 7 proposed members could be from existing committees. So you're really not getting necessarily.
Well, that's what I think we're talking
Yeah,
about, just
you're not
removing
necessarily getting,
some of those committee
um,
appointments.
some fresh views or some very specific legal expertise. It's as an example, or some science reporting, communication skills.
I
or-
wasn't suggesting actually that you needed to actually have these people from these particular committees. You could, as long as you can still recruit from other committees.
Right.
I
And
think
that's
that's
why I
really
talked about
important.
app 10.
Yeah.
App 10 gives us that option of, I mean, if we in the charge say that for the purpose of app 10, they could be members of another committee, that gives us the option of pulling them in,
But it doesn't require it.
but doesn't require it, which is
Make
what the
the
current
choices,
charge
and if we-
says. So
And if we turned out that in fact, this was the right mix, nothing would stop us from, in fact, appointing the people who fit into those categories.
yeah.
So why
So-
not leave it open and
I think
Great.
I think we're getting a sense of the board. That's what we're going to do.
I think that's great.
Okay.
So let me make sure I understand this because I'll put together another
So
draft.
right now it carves out members
Right.
that come from specific boards or committees. So
Right.
what we're going to do is remove that, but then
Right.
instead say for the purpose of this task force, and
Right, I understand that.
you don't need to be, you can be a member of multiple
Okay.
things.
So
And
I
then
understand that
we
part.
now, when
The
we
other
are,
part is, I thought, sorry.
well, my question is, do you want it to say one or two representatives from the former NMI Star Met Committee, one or two representatives from the 2229 Main Street Committee? You want to keep those two and just take out Board of Health, NRC, or you want to mention no committees?
mention no committees, mention no specific,
I mean, I do think that there's a different, first of all, I think there's every probability that we will get two members of the former
Exactly.
NMI
Yeah,
Star.
right.
I mean, it's not going to,
Yeah.
I
Right.
don't think it's going to make
But
any
why-
material
Right.
difference.
but why
agree.
tie our hands
Yeah. Okay.
if we don't need to?
Sure.
But I think the important part, Terry, of rewriting this is to focus on number 2 under duties and responsibilities,
Right.
right? Okay.
But I haven't heard any suggestions of changing number 2.
No, I
Maybe
haven't
just
either.
say this is the main focus.
Well,
or
I'm
something.
wondering if we even
Cut-
need the
cut
rest
a
of
few
them.
of the rest of them.
Cut the rest of them. It's I would be happy if we did number 2 really well.
Okay.
I liked Paul's proposal or suggestion of these 3 thrusts, right? And that if we maybe just had those 3.
But we've already done
aspect.
one of them pretty much, the one about the use.
Yeah, well, I think that it needs to be put into a different context.
Okay.
Right? It's
Mhm.
not that, I don't think we're talking about redoing my Starbet by any means. I think it's really a matter of creating an assumption or a recommendation around an approach that then will be used to
Forms the risk.
inform the
Okay,
risk
great.
assessment.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
that's what I was hoping to get. And then the communications aspects.
And I also want to mention again about the tag grant. There's a lot missing, I think. I think we're going to need further grants. Like, for example, I was hoping we'd have best practices outlined from other communities. What have they done? I'm pretty sure, Matt, that's how you sold it. And I was convinced by that. How have they dealt with brownfields in their community? And I don't see that in this tag grant. And as I said,
Part of the risk assessment.
yeah, I guess so. And it's, have other communities gotten sued or not? And what's the difference here? And what do we do about that? How do we protect against that? Those are questions the public is going to ask. I have no idea what the answers are now. And I should know.
There's a good starting point to that in the NMI StarNet.
There is a case
Whole
studies.
section on other sites, similar sites in other communities who've acquired and used those sites.
In Massachusetts?
Some in Massachusetts, some other places.
Okay, good.
There's a starting point.
Great.
It may require some digging, direct communications with several of those
All right.
entities.
But the focus there was really upon the uses.
Right.
It was a case study approach, but really it focused on, well, what were the benefits that the community was able to derive from the site. I think what you're looking for is essentially how did the communities in acquiring the site, what mechanisms did they use to reduce potential liabilities and other concerns and, you know,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right, and maybe there's a.
And that
series of-
takes a lot of research. I would
Yeah,
imagine.
that's what I thought this
Oh.
tag grant was going to do.
Well, it's only
because-
20 grand. I don't know.
Exactly. I really feel like we're going to need more grants
Well,
after that.
That is the scope of work. And
Yeah.
Chris is moving forward on that.
Yeah, it's a
scope
lot
work.
of scope for 20 grand.
It really is.
Even as is, but.
I think
So I
that's-
guess, go ahead, Pam.
So one of the things that's true about those tag grants is that it's much easier to get more money for them to keep extending them. And that is kind of why it was written sort of broadly. So that you can, so it's $20,000 now, but we can continue to
All right.
ask for more money there.
So I'm getting a sense, Terry, that, I mean, we've given kind of conceptual
Mhm.
feedback and I don't know that we need a full discussion next time, but we probably do need to look at this again before we can approve the charge.
Yes.
And I think we can do that as quickly as you feel comfortable bringing it back to us.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it could
I
be
will do
March
that.
20th.
Yeah, I
it
can
could
do,
be-
I can do that. It's not,
Okay.
I think what I'm going to do for the duties and responsibilities is number 2, I'm going to say, this is the main focus, the
Okay.
main responsibility.
Yep.
And then these other things support that or whatever.
Yeah,
Or
I think
something
that
like that.
You
the-
want to,
All right. If anyone has suggestions on what you want to pare down, send me an email.
okay.
Okay, I think that the outcome of this discussion has been I think you hear general support for a task force. There's some concerns about
Yes.
time frame. There's some concerns about the scope of the thing. There's some concerns about costs, but overall, I think this idea of having a separate task force, there seems to be pretty clear consensus, and it's really a matter of just getting that scope right.
Question on membership and solicitation of members or
Yeah.
how,
I think it'd be good to start soliciting members. I
Okay.
think because we're probably going to want to hit the ground running once
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
do get this.
and what's the communication path? Is it
So, well, first of all, I mean, I think that as of tonight, we can say there's going to be this task force. What's the working title? I don't
Working
think
title, yeah. 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force.
that's pretty general, but okay. But then that it's about working out how and whether the site could be acquired. And we are looking for those skill sets that could help us come to that. And that what we would now do as far as next steps of the formation, we would look at the revised charge, approve the revised charge, and then we could take nominations as soon as even the same committee meeting later on. I mean, the same board meeting later on, if we agreed to the charge. So,
Do you want Terry to have a chance to talk to the people that are nominated?
oh, well, no, well, that's true too.
So there's some time.
It'd be good
Yeah.
to talk to them, but,
she'll need time
and
to
then
do
there's still not, there's nominations, but appointments wouldn't be until the subsequent meeting.
that. Right.
So I,
So we're looking for people with expertise in a relevant field like hydrology, environmental law, public health, toxicology, brownfield site remediation, and engineering.
and communications.
Communication.
And communications, yes.
would you like us to suggest names to, I'm just.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering. Okay.
Names with a little bit of information about.
Well, they can submit the volunteer card that's
Yeah,
got,
that's the best way.
Okay. So it is the standard green card process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Except for that, I think they're going to have to just pencil in the committee because it won't be on the list.
Right.
So it means
Yeah.
they can't do it online.
Well, no, they can put in the description. You could just,
They
is there
can
like
put it
an
online.
other? Can you say other or?
Like there is.
There's an other box, but there are plenty of other descriptive boxes.
You know what? They could apply for the 2229 Main Street Committee. And I think we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
Actually,
right.
Shannon, can you just add a committee? Can you add this committee on there? Okay,
I've never altered that before, but I don't see why we wouldn't be able to. do
Right.
that.
Put another box in.
Yeah. That would be good because we'll have to do it eventually anyway.
Right.
And you're going to be aware that somebody might apply to be on the 2229 committee when they really mean to be on this
Oh,
new
yeah.
committee too.
Then it's only going to be a 1 or 2 word difference in title. Okay.
Okay, great.
I think that does it.
Thank you.
Okay.
very
Thank you
much.
for coming in and everybody's patience as we work through this. All right. So here's what's going on next.
What?
We, as a board, need to weigh in on various town meeting articles. Now, I attempted to have a session after the first hearing for us to weigh in on the select board articles, and that didn't go very well, in part because it was very late in the evening, but also in part because board members needed more information on several of these articles. So I felt that tonight, now that we've had also the first finance committee hearing, I would have a brief conversation with the board about which articles you would want to get some additional information or presentation or anything else on before we made our deliberation on them. So looking at the list, and I'm just gonna, that list that's in our packet is just the full list. That's awfully comprehensive. What I was going to do instead is just bring up here, the lists from the town's website that had by public hearing. Okay, so here is the list from our select board public hearing. So clearly with the personnel board actions 4, 5, and 6, that we're going to have a subsequent hearing, so that's fine. DEI director, in order to deliberate on this, is there any further information, or people feel like they would be ready in a subsequent meeting to?
Well, we had
What's the article
questions
number?
about
Do you have
it.
it?
We had questions.
That was
about
Article 10.
10. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
the about whether or not in the absence of the study from the DI Commission and a recommendation from them, whether it was at this point appropriate to appoint a full-time person to that job and where they would fit into the organizational structure of the town, who they would report to and so on, and a job description and all those things. So it's, I think that what the consensus was, it was premature, at least until we had a recommendation from the DEI committee.
Well, the DEI commission, I think, was talking about a director level position that reported to the town manager. I believe that's what I read in the presentation.
But I
They
agree
didn't
with Henry,
sponsor this article.
but,
Well, it's a petition article. That's the
Right,
second thing.
but Henry is right. You'd have to have, there's lots of directors and managers and what classification is this? Where's the job description? What are the duties? I'm not kind of unclear really. What is this person exactly going to do?
I mean, there was a list of
There was.
responsibilities.
I guess I have a question for Carrie, because I heard you say there were $75,000 in the budget and for a consultant and something else for DEI. And I'm wondering what this person would do that isn't already covered by the consultant.
Well, and I should mention that at the time that this presentation was made, that the DEI commission members were not aware of the 75,000,
Right.
even though Carrie had spoken about it before, but they were not they were not aware. And I think at this point, the sense I got was that, in the most subsequent meeting that I attended, that they're more or less okay. I mean, they would really like to expedite the hiring more, but that the 75,000 is a good step.
Mhm.
And that there are things that can be done with that, while we await being able to add a DI director to the budget. So I actually think that, it's a question of when you say expedite, how fast is expedite? And there were some opinions offered on that. And again, there are people that would say yesterday would be the right answer. But that, we are in a fiscal difficulty. So,
So Matt, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to reiterate, it's not in the fiscal 24 budget. The warrant article is not written as an expenditure
right.
article. I was not, given that we have $75,000 in the budget to advance initiatives, I was not planning to reallocate that to a staff.
No, and see,
position
as a
there.
practical matter, this is probably an FY25
Yes,
suggestion is how I interpreted it at this point.
yes.
Or
And-
from what you
But,
just said.
but
it might
again,
be
we're
later.
deliberating now on
We're
this article.
deliberating now.
The
I
point
know,
is,
I know.
the intent of these kinds of things, I was hoping to go down through this list pretty fast and just say, okay, what do we need more? And the reason we've gotten into sort of deliberation here is that there's some debate over what we have and haven't heard. Okay,
It's going to be
and
hard
that's
to
so-
avoid deliberation.
To answer your question of what do more information we need, I still have the same question. What duties would this person do that are not already in the consultant and the 75,000? I don't know if I'm being clear.
You are.
Yeah, but
Or I would
I
even
also
stop
do
with what-
believe, and I said it before, that the presentation of the article at the public hearing did lay that out. And so I'm just wondering
No,
from
I
an
thought-
information perspective, what you're expecting to get.
Oh, I thought there was an overlap between that presentation because like you said, they didn't know that Kerry already had it in the budget. So I think a lot of those things they presented are already in the consultant, but Kerry could probably clarify.
Well, so what I would say is I'm actually a little surprised to hear that they didn't know that it was in the budget. Maybe it wasn't clear because the $75,000, the way I came up with that was a conversation with members of the DEI commission where they talked about what projects they would be or initiatives they would be looking to undertake after they had the results of the survey. And there were just some rough estimates given to the costs of those. And they were talking about a calendar year and I was looking at a fiscal year. They had 3 projects identified and I picked 2 and that was roughly $75,000. So there isn't any specific scope of work associated with that $75,000 other than to advance initiatives.
Right. And I think, again, everything, all of that just wasn't clear to them, both,
Yeah.
Calendar year versus fiscal year, the amount of money, the way you arrived at that amount and then what it can be used for. So I think that now there's more clarity about that.
Mhm.
And I think that that may help in terms of interpreting then the request for what expedite now means. So that's why. But again, I get back to Terry, your question about what are roles and responsibilities. I don't know that we're going to get any more information
Mhm.
other than what was already included in the presentation, which was quite extensive actually on that front.
Okay.
So anything else that we would need before we could deliberate in a future meeting?
On anything here?
On Article 10.
Oh.
I'll just now move to 22.
No, I think the issue is not that we don't know enough. The
Okay.
issue is what our recommendation is going to be based
Yeah.
on what we know.
Right. And we'll take that up next meeting. So the next is citizen petition in Article 22 municipal in-town solar generation task force. Any further info needs people have before we could deliberate on that?
I would like to know what the other studies, but I think we've already had 2 studies done by outside consultants looking at potential sites within the town for solar. So I'd just like to know.
What other studies there are?
Yeah. 'Cause
Okay.
like,
So let's take that as a note. Okay,
And I think we need clarification from Dave Wood about, again, where he is on this particular item.
okay.
Hmm.
Do we want to just a statement from him, or you want him to come in? What are we
Well,
gonna do?
he actually, I think he has something on the CMLP website in response to the article that was passed last year. But he should say that. Maybe that would be.
Yeah, this
He
is,
does have something.
and this
I
is
think.
different from last year's. Yeah. Okay, adopt the specialized stretch energy code. Any further
Wait,
info
can we
need?
slow down for a minute? This is different in that this is asking for a task force to do what last year's article was asking
Right,
CMLP to do.
right.
So it's not,
More or less, I guess. Yeah,
well, how else is it different?
that's a good one sentence summary.
Okay, so I think, in other words, I think Dave has responded to last year's. So, and that's what you're asking for.
Okay.
I'll look that up.
Article 23, do we need more info about specialized stretch energy code? Adoption. Going once.
Do we know what it is, what it actually requires?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah, that's-
state law.
But I mean,
It's just a matter of, do we want to opt into it or not? Article 30, the Plainfield Road easement. You were waiting for something, right, Linda? We couldn't.
I thought there was
NRC
no
was-
motion
I think
expected on this.
NRC was supposed to act on it.
Oh, there was an NRC meeting. We were waiting for an NRC meeting, and which is still yet to come,
March 15th.
March 15th. So we're waiting for their deliberation. So that's all set. We approved, or we moved to recommend action on Article 20 or 32. And then we get to Articles 36 and 37.
Did the petitioner have any information about what other towns are doing around noise?
They
bylaw?
modeled it after Lexington.
Okay.
So
I guess the question I have on these two is, did the petitioner receive feedback that would suggest that he might either change some of the wording of his and check with
They got tons of feedback.
they did and check with the town moderator if it's whatever changes he might propose, if any,
right.
are within the scope.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to both of them. And, and I'm also wondering if, especially on Article 36, but it also sounded like people were going in this direction on 37, whether someone from the board, like the chair, needs to approach the petitioner and ask if he receives sufficient feedback from the community that
Yeah, I was giving some time to the petitioner, given that there were some
Withdraw.
discussions about possibly meeting with others and coming up with some other approach. So I felt like I'd give some time for that before going back, but I think now is a good time to circle back. Okay, so that's all of the items for the select board hearing. Now moving on to the finance committee hearing. I'm just scrolling down here. I mean, in terms of town budget, any of these items that you feel that we would need additional information before we could deliberate? Yes.
I would like more information on Article 25, the appropriation for the 250th.
Uh-huh.
It's asking for 600,000. I think that's enough money that I'd like to see, not minutia detail, but some kind of line items about some more detail about how I saw some general ideas, but I would like to see more detail how it's going to be spent.
Okay.
Matt,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to the question that Linda asked about Dave's response. He did post on his website something called Expanding Solar Generation on the CMLP System. It's in response to Article 38 of last year's town meeting. So that might be informative to us. So shall I just forward that to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Be
but I
great.
mean, do you think that that addresses the issue or do we need to ask Dave for more information?
I haven't read it.
I think it's an outline. There's some sections that are more complete than others. I think it's more a timing than anything. The light plant and light board has been busy on the advanced metering project and the middle school solar project and has not made the type of progress in the timetable that the petitioner envisioned. So I think that's the crux of the issue.
Right. Right. So actually, I think maybe what Mary's asking is, what is CMLP's position on this article? Are they going to publicly oppose it or support it or work with it? Or
So the additional information we might want is what's the light board's
Yes.
position?
Is that,
Yeah.
well, it was Linda's.
Yeah, the staff is not going to take a position on
Right.
it or
Right.
give a position.
The board.
Yeah.
Because last year the light board was asked, what is their position on Article 38? And now I think they might be asked, what is your position on this
You're
article?
right.
So,
So I can bring that up. I can bring that up at the.
yeah, I
board.
mean, because I wonder if they're even intending to take a position, but we should probably press for that.
Bring that up.
Okay.
I will do that.
When's the next meeting?
This Wednesday
Wednesday.
morning.
Great.
Very timely. Okay. Although too late to put it on their agenda.
It is. Well, they
They-
meet every
they-
2 weeks.
Yeah.
They meet, it'll be fine.
Okay.
Last year, their response was very minimal.
Okay.
You can just ask in public comment and then they can respond in
Right.
the next meeting.
Right. And,
Yeah.
and I think, well, we're talking about, we would be looking at this on maybe March 20th or 27th. We have those two meetings.
Oh, for
Okay.
us to.
Yeah.
I see what you're trying
Yeah.
to do. now. Okay.
All right. It is on their agenda.
Which agenda?
Oh,
Wednesday.
wonderful. Okay, good.
Wow.
They've anticipated
Yeah,
this.
good. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you, member of the public.
Really?
All right. So, on the finance committee, other interests, concerns, like community preservation committee appropriations, any concerns or questions about any of those before we deliberate?
Article 14, I think we already talked about that tonight, the opioid settlement.
That's a different opioid settlement.
a
That
different-
was fund number one.
Okay,
That's the-
well,
It's just basically taking the money.
right, we're definitely gonna support taking the money,
Right.
but we're going to get some
I
kind
mean,
of a
it's-
one-page
it's
summary.
appropriating the
Yeah,
money to use, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any others?
Second.
I had, and I already approached, Carrie after the hearing about Article 43. That, I wanted better clarity
Yeah.
on the revenue projections for the parking meter fund, because my understanding was that we weren't actually enforcing parking meters now, so it looked like there was a lot of revenue coming in still, and I didn't see how that was happening.
Right, right.
You people don't know we're not enforcing.
Well, I imagine that people do throw quarters
I
into
know
those
they
things
do.
every once in a while, sure,
I
but
see them. I don't tell them.
When does a current contract expire? Didn't we renew it for 1 year?
We did. And what I mentioned is this is as much a placeholder as anything because there hasn't been any formal vote to discontinue the program. We can't spend money that we don't have. And the presentation was put together with the assumption that we would have a full year's worth of activity. So we certainly can have more of a discussion about this at one of your next couple of meetings, but that was how it was put
yeah,
together.
and we should probably separate out the larger parking discussion from just Article 43,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, Any other, it seems like we're okay.
Yeah.
For all of these. And now, of course, we do have a couple of hearings coming up. Planning board
Planning
got their
board's going
forward.
late, isn't it?
No, it got delayed until the 29th. By the way,
I didn't know
why?
I
You
think
know-
there was an issue with the public hearing notice. I think, Shannon, I don't know if that, or you're not involved in that.
Really?
Yeah.
I saw the public hearing notice in the bridge for the 8th.
Yeah, it's on the warrant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's on the warrant.
Right.
It's going to the 29th, did you say?
Yes, that's what I heard.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of messes with the public notice aspects because, I mean, if members of the board weren't aware of this,
Wasn't.
then
Well,
that's
Carrie mentioned it
problematic,
earlier.
right?
Carrie, you mentioned it during your,
Well, I think
Well,
they're
the-
going to have to meet and continue it, right? Just meet for 1 minute just to vote to continue it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can follow up on that and shoot you an email tomorrow, but it was my understanding that there was an issue with the notification.
Even if
It's already,
it's,
yeah, but the 29th is already posted on the,
yeah, even if the
Makes sense.
29th is already posted, I think that logging into the Zoom tomorrow night, at least to tell members of the public that no, this
Yeah.
isn't happening,
Yeah.
would be,
And
very
they both need to vote to continue it.
But actually having it in for zoning articles, giving the proper advertising as notice affects the validity of the
Of
zoning, anything that gets passed by the town meeting.
Yeah.
Right.
And because the effective date of any zoning bylaw that is passed then relates back to the date of the initial notice of the zoning bylaw, the publication of it. So that has a lot of significance for the planning
Yeah.
board.
well,
it says on the calendar that it was postponed.
I assume there are folks that have thought through the legal ramifications of this reschedule, but it's very extraordinary.
The calendar says it was postponed. The town-
Yeah. And I still haven't heard why. And so other than, okay, notice maybe there was some problem.
Poor planning.
Anyway, by the way, we won't have so much luxury next time of saying, okay, here's what more info I want. 2 weeks later, have that info. If we could just briefly look ahead at the other articles, is there anything you anticipate, that we can just now already know, even though the hearing hasn't taken place?
Well,
We're gonna
I
need to
was
do
going to
something more.
say in my liaison report, I was at a joint meeting between the finance committee and the school committee,
Yeah.
and they are $500,000 or $600,000 apart and not making much progress. And the select board may have to, we're gonna have to take a position eventually. So, that's coming up at this next meeting.
Right, but the public hearing will be
Right,
one
right.
meeting before
Right,
then too.
right.
Okay,
So as far as the article for the 1.8 million, when will the bids be in? The 1.8 million for the fields and landscaping for the middle school?
so there was a new set of dates at the middle school building committee.
April 27th is when we expect to have the bids reviewed and vetted and available. So three days before town.
And
meeting.
let immediately after that.
Yeah.
So
So
before
we'll-
town meeting.
We'll know then whether,
So,
Funny how that happens.
but yeah, so it'll be before town meeting. Yeah. Okay, then the planning board, so I imagine the enterprise articles is probably not much there. The zoning articles, they're just the three, there's the fast food restaurants, mobile food establishment, and there are different affordable housing requirements for combined business and residents. It's actually a light year for
Yeah.
zoning.
Yeah.
I mean, although
There's
I have
a lot
a
on
feeling
board.
that the food trucks
yeah, they'll take.
would, take up some interest, but okay. So I think that's it for this discussion. We can now move to the legal budget discussion. Madam
Okay, thank
Town
you.
Manager.
Yeah, so there is a memorandum that was added to your packet yesterday. I tried to cover the questions that have been asked over the last several months. So the first question that people have asked is really who appoints council and how are the expenses overseen? So according to the charter, it is the town manager with the approval of the select board is essentially how that happens. There are a couple of different references within the charter, which are included in the packet. And so on an annual basis, council is appointed. So for fiscal 23, we have Anderson and Krieger appointed as town council, and we have Merrick O'Connell appointed as labor council. I mentioned that we do have other special counsel. We do not, to the best of my knowledge, appoint special counsel on an annual basis, but we have special counsel for water and sewer, the firm of Bowditch and Dewey, and for special counsel for electric, Duncan and Allen.
When are those appointments made by you?
For special counsel,
No, for regular council.
annual,
When?
for July 1, for the fiscal year.
And you make the appointment on July 1st?
We start making various appointments probably in June for the following year.
So we have time to reconsider.
We have time. And so I mentioned in the memo that legal services fall under an exemption to Mass General Law 30B, which is the procurement statute. I mentioned there are several exemptions. I don't know that I've listed them, but for instance, we hire an auditor on an annual basis that is a service that is exempt. That doesn't mean that you don't go through a process or you don't have to go through a process. You just don't have to go through a specific process that's set forth in Mass General law. So it has been a number of years since we've procured legal services. That's not unusual. It's been a number of years since we've procured auditing services or actuarial services. But I did mention that I didn't go back and look to when we procured it last, but I've been with the town for 7 years and we haven't done it in the last 7 years. So I think I'll just pause there to see if there are any questions before I move on to the next section. If we were to go through a procurement process, we can do a request for proposals, request for qualifications, request for information. They're all a little bit different, but they're not that different. But again, because we're not trying to meet any particular section of Mass General Law, we have some flexibility if we were to go through an official procurement process. So then the next question really was on our current year expenses, and I've put together some information on current year budget and expenses, and then just looked at the last 5 years. You can see that in the general fund, the budget for legal expenses has gone up significantly. And since we were able to increase that, and with the winding up of the Estabrook trial, we were in budget last year, and we're projecting to be under budget this year by about $30,000 to $50,000. The legal expenses are incurred in several different funds. It's not just the general fund, but that's what we talk about. The other significant legal expenses are really related to the enterprise funds and water. I mean, you're all well aware of the NAGOG suit that we spent a significant amount of money over a couple of year period. So there really isn't anything particularly remarkable about legal expenses in fiscal 23, other than expenses do seem to have a way of meeting the budget. So that's, and the budget is significant. And I don't want to say we haven't had anything significant in terms of legal expenses. We've had a lot of medium-sized things, certainly nothing to the extent of Estabrook, but we do have ongoing and increasing public records requests. We have several that really come in on a pretty frequent basis related to Estherbrook. A lot of those require some legal review, not everything, but there's definitely some. We have 2 public records lawsuits related to Estherbrook that we don't talk about a whole lot. I think I maybe just sent out the summary motion for summary judgment. But that we do have these ongoing requests, and unfortunately we're not able to handle 100% of them in-house. So there is some legal expense, but other than that, there isn't anything that's particularly remarkable. I did mention that general services is running slightly ahead. I don't know that is a cause for concern. Those are just, you pick up the phone, you've got a question about something, planning staff has a question, or and that doesn't happen in equal parts throughout the year. So I don't think there's anything particularly significant about that.
I have a question about this chart. You have in FY23, you have the budget, the total budget is 481,000.
Across all funds.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the total actual, it's year-to-date actual, 265?
Yep.
Okay, and then the general fund, that's the year-to-date actual for just the general fund.
Yeah, and these are through January.
Got it. Oh, through Jane. Okay.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand what the general fund prior year, is that like a carry forward?
So that's a timing issue. It's really sometimes these bills come in pretty slowly. And so if we know we have a bill outstanding, we encumber from the prior year.
Now, aren't public records requests supposed to be self-funding to some degree?
Oh, boy, they are not even close.
That's
We-
that's just for staff time.
Yeah, and we are limited on the hourly
charge.
rate that we can charge, and we're, not even close.
Right, it's like minimum wage and 5 cents a page or something.
And we really try to process all requests without charging, because we don't want to charge people. But sometimes, I mean, we have a couple that we're looking at right now that, one of them returned 3,000 responsive emails. And so we engage in a conversation with the requester and see if we can narrow that down. But and so all of that, we're not charging, but we might get to a point where we do charge because we've got a lot of time into something.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like it's appropriate to charge for these cases.
So on the larger ones, the charge only comes in for the litigation? Is that what you're saying?
Only for the
Where we have a hard,
administration costs.
where we incur an expense.
Right.
And we can't charge, if we have a $500 legal expense related to a public records request, we don't recoup that. We can recoup an hourly rate, and the hourly rates are set. And they're not at all reflective of what the actual cost is.
Yeah. Overall, I understood that. Yeah. Okay.
So then we move to the next question is about this coming year.
Yeah. And so, now certainly is the time to be talking about this, because if we do want to look at legal services, we would like to go through some sort of formal process, and there definitely is a timetable associated with that. We really would need a couple of months to get through that process,
Which we have.
which we have.
So first of all, I really appreciate you doing all these charts and this analysis. You answered pretty
Especially
much.
the colors.
Well, I printed it in black and white, but it answered a lot of my questions. I'm basically happy with a lot of the legal services that we are getting, but I do think it's good business practice every few years, maybe 5 years, or at the most 10 years, to go out for some type of RFQ on pretty much everything, including auditors and legal. And so maybe it is time to do it, or if not this year, maybe the following year. I mean, I think that we've gotten really good service in a lot of the areas. So I don't know how other board members feel.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I wasn't, I mean, I think that the town council is good. The labor council, I wasn't that impressed with. But I didn't have a lot of exposure because I'm new. But I
Right. So I kind of agree with that. So that's another option that maybe we just go out for RFQ on the Labor Council.
Yeah.
I don't know.
it's an option. What it could-
I think it might be an interesting way to kind of trial the process for then how we, the subsequent year would do a town council review.
Yep. Actually, I generally agree with that because at the time we were working with Labor Council, I had some questions as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I would say about Labor Council, we work with a number of attorneys in that firm. We do primarily work with the attorney that the board has worked with, but there are other attorneys that we work with. And I think the staff that regularly work with Labor Council feel the same as the staff that regularly work with Town Council, that we feel that we do get good service on a day-to-day basis. But I do understand and I'm aware of the feedback in your interaction that was different, I think, than our experience with. And again, we don't always work with the same attorney.
And there's
in
a
the firm.
difference between, and I think in contracting for legal services, it would be good to distinguish between the routine work that is day-to-day service, answering questions and dealing with just the problems that come up. And then there's the issues where when there's a large issue, like, you know, when we get sued by somebody and there's a potential for, you know, substantial exposure, do you want to like look for somebody who has a higher level of skill than the person who is perfectly good for your day-to-day corporate and labor and administrative, you know, questions?
Mhm.
Carrie, is it mostly the HR department that interacts with the Labor Council?
It is, and then the other big intersection is when we're doing union negotiations, and so various
Contract?
managers are involved in that process.
And do the
as well.
schools, they have their own?
They do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, because I mean, there's major union negotiation happening next year.
And what is there any feedback from the managers, the department heads about the labor negotiations, that maybe they have the same type of reaction that the select board has had, or are they not wanting to go out for an RFQ? And maybe you don't know because there's been a lot of turnover with department heads, so.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is on a day-to-day basis, staff is happy with the various attorneys and firms that we work with. I can tell you, because I've had a lot of experience working with different firms, and Anderson Krieger in particular is very responsive, highly responsive.
Yep.
for day-to-day, provides very good input, and you know, doesn't spend a lot of time. What we get billed for, I think, is very reasonable for the work that is done. That is most of our interaction. Labor Council is much less. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think, I mean, again, you're responsible for appointments and we're responsible for approvals, but it does sound like we've got some idea about, maybe we take a look at how we procure Labor Council this year
Yeah.
as a process, and then we have a process that we can repeat perhaps.
It certainly would be easier to do one versus both since,
Yeah.
I mean, we do have a few months, but we don't have a lot of.
Well,
time,
and there
so.
also, there's sort of times where it's easier to change horses than others. And I
Yes.
think with
Yeah.
labor, this is a time we could,
Well,
more easily.
well, we can think about that. Another thing I think that ought to be part of our legal program is some kind of loss prevention education for particularly for town committees that have such as the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, the HDC, and the natural resources that make decisions that are frequently appealed and that go to a higher level, and maybe just giving some basic education to the members of the boards on a recurring basis for them to get a better understanding of what the consequences of their actions may be.
Well, there's actually the community planning conference that's held annually in Worcester, and they have a standing item that's called writing legally defensible decisions.
No.
That's for specifically for the ZBA and for the planning board. And, you can get certified as a citizen planner, having taken, the sequence of classes that include that kind of thing. We don't promote it much. I know that when I sat on the planning board, I was the only one that went through the certification, and it was not that painful. And it was kind of like they send out a thing saying, hey, do you want to do it? If you do, well, we'll pay the fee for the course. But other than that, there wasn't really much inducement, I guess, to do it. And they also, you can have instructors come in
Yeah.
and present to you. Now it costs significantly more, but it
Not generally, probably not more than one piece of litigation.
yeah. No, but okay,
So-
but I do think that that's a worthwhile suggestion that we should look into that.
As I say, an ounce of prevention.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Citizen planner, that's what it's called, citizen planner. Yeah.
Carrie, what do you have in the general fund legal for FY24?
The same as
450?
23, 450.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe slightly higher.
Okay.
Um,
So there's room in there to help with the 2229 Main Street test.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every year there's something that comes up that's, somewhat significant.
Thank you. Okay, good.
And maybe even this year, if they got going, we have, some room within the budget
Right, you
to
said you got
start.
a little bit of headroom.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually
'Cause I
very
was
worth
concerned.
considering. Yeah.
Yeah, I was concerned about that.
Yeah. you-
So does that conclude our discussion then for this time?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, the sense I'm hearing is that you'd like us to gear up to do the same for town council in the following fiscal year.
I think it would be
Yeah.
a good practice. And it would be also interesting just to know, when was the last time that we looked at that? I think it's been 10 plus years.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it is
Yeah.
time
Practice.
just from a,
Right.
Just to learn.
I found when I worked in other towns that a lot of times the current council was retained, but it sharpened their services. They could see what the competition was, and they could hear from the board and the town manager what was expected, and it was just a really good refresher for everybody.
Okay.
okay. Then let's move to committee nominations. I don't know that we have any this
You
time.
have
I think there
one.
was
Oh,
one.
well, okay.
Wait a minute. Now I'm a little bit confused. We have the Civil War Monument Task Force.
That's
Is
a point.
that an appointment?
Yeah, I don't think we
Okay.
have any.
Okay,
Yeah.
We
So
don't
I
have
think
that.
that let's move then to appointments.
okay. Move to appoint Catherine McGrath of 134 Belknap Street to complete an unexpired term to conclude at the completion of the project to the Civil War Monument Task Force. And move to appoint Sharon Gibson of 1641 Main Street for a term to expire May 30th, 2024. Jerry Frankel of 132 Jenny Dugan Road for a term to expire April 30th, 2025. Janet Miller of 1647 Main Street for a term to expire April 30th, 2025. Michael McDonald of 208 Wright Road for a term to expire May 30th, 2024. Cheryl Baggin of 3 Bolton Street for a term to expire April 30th, 2025. Ben Sladen of 135 Hillside Avenue for a term to expire April 30th, 2025. Gavin Colbert of 88 Old Marlborough Road for a term to expire April 30th, 2025. Jake Swenson of 140 Nutmeadow Crossing for a term to expire May 30th, 2024. Paul Kirshen of 38 Longfellow Road for a term to expire May 31st, 2024. John Bolduc of 58 Stowe Road, Unit 9, for a term to expire April 30th, 2023. Brian Crounce of 49 Indian Pipe Lane for a term to expire May 31st, 2024. Brad Hubbard Nelson of 221 Nishotic Road for a term to expire April 30th, 2025. Courtney Eaton of 141 Munson Road for a term to expire May 31st, 2024. And all of the above were for the Climate Action Committee. And finally, to move to appoint Roberto Almeida of 28 Comerford Road to complete an unexpired term to conclude on May 31st, 2024 for the Planning Board.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And with congratulations, Terry, for reading that.
Oh,
Really, good job.
Yeah.
can't wait till someone else is clerk next year to read all of this stuff.
Okay. I wanted to acknowledge 3 pieces of correspondence that were included in our packet. One about the emergency family shelter, one about the wireless communication bylaw, and one talking about the noise and leaf blower citizen petitions that were presented at our select board public hearing. There also was a piece or two of correspondence we were not able to include from a policy perspective for talking about items that related to executive meeting matters and or reputation of individuals, but I want to assure the authors that they have been forwarded to the board. That takes me to the liaison reports. So who'd like to start?
I'll start. I'll be
All right.
I only have 2 things. One is that Terry and I had a phone conversation with Liz Rust, because after the conversation we had when Power came in here around the Junction Village site, I think I was confused as to what was the next step, because I heard things like letter of intent, comprehensive permit, and I think what we learned from that conversation was the next step would be an RFP. Did you hear that, Terry?
Well, right, but I think they want to get public input first, right? Before they even do the RFP.
Yes.
Yeah, we got a lot of things clarified with Liz that we had questions on, but that was one of the
good.
main
Right.
ones.
So they're doing a lot of public input, but the next formal step, I guess, would be the RFP.
Right, and I was really encouraged how fast they want to move. We'll see if they stick to that timetable.
The other thing the second thing is I also went to that joint FinCom school committee meeting to talk about the budget and the gap. I thought Dr. Hunter did a good job of explaining why she needed the more money mostly because of SPED, and also the fact that there would be some services and programs that would be cut in order to meet that. On the other hand, I thought the finance committee did a really good job of basically reminding us that we're facing 2 years of an 8% tax increase because of the school committee, because of the middle school, sorry. So I thought it was a good exchange there between 2 sides. One thing that I came away with from that meeting is that I'm not sure in order to find a way out of this problem, this perennial problem, one of the things we need to explore is more opportunities to generate revenue, and revenue being ways that we could help generate that by supporting the business community, but also ways that the school committee can look at generating revenue from the schools. So I think just saving is something every year we seem to go through the same routine where we're looking to find savings, and it comes into program cuts, and we're not ready to do that. So how do we find revenue? And again, I guess what I'd be asking is, how does the select board and the planning board find revenue sources, but also how can the school committee find revenue sources, either through public-private partnerships, grants, or even fees for school activities?
Okay.
Well,
Terry?
Okay, well, segued it from that. I also attended the Finance Committee public hearing and also the League of Women Voters candidate debate yesterday. And there seems to be a theme coming out of all of this, that we had some very good years financially where we had 10 to 12% free cash. And every year we could put $1 million in to reduce our tax rate, and we could put money into for affordable housing, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that might be coming to an end in the next couple of years. And we're going to have to tighten our belts somehow and look for more revenues, more grants. And that seemed to be a real theme of a number of these meetings. I also attended the solar project discussion from CMLP about the middle school, and I learned a lot. It was a very informative meeting, very well done. And the previous week, I've mentioned Cargill and that joint meeting. Also the personnel situation with the class and comp plan. On February 21st, the consultant presented to employees, and that went really well. I think there were hardly any questions, which was, I thought, a big surprise. And now there's a 2-week period where employees can ask for reconsideration. So things are moving along. I also went to a Hanscom Field Zoom meeting. 93 people were on it. And there were 2 types of basic comments. One type was, let's stop this Hanscom project at all costs. On the other half of the people, approximately, thought we won't be able to completely stop it. How do we mitigate it? How do we negotiate it? And Senator Barrett was certainly in that camp, and he was advocating to have only electric planes, and he had some examples of how the technology is already here. So it was a very well attended meeting. And there was a big consensus that HAPS needs to resume, that I've talked with Linda about, that the Hanscom Area Town Select Board, there's a big outcry for them to start meeting again. I think that's, yeah, I'll just stop there.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Terry, the comp and benefits plan, would the results of that show that we were generally in line with what our
Yeah.
current,
Well, they
so
did.
there are no big surprises?
Carrie
Or maybe Carrie?
could probably answer that better.
Yeah, so I would say that most of the positions were in line. There weren't a lot of big surprises, but there will be some movement, because what we have found through the job analysis is there are a lot of people over time that have taken on duties that have changed what their classification is. So there might be some movements in classifications, but we're not creating lots of new jobs. So the benchmark positions, yeah, we really were. We've been saying 85th percentile, and we really are at 85th percentile.
For compensation. and benefits.
Compensation, yeah.
For compensation.
Yeah.
What about benefits?
So the benefits piece we're not doing right now. We're doing
Oh, okay.
class and comp will do benefits.
Okay, I didn't know
Next.
that. I thought you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the 85th
Yeah.
percentile.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Linda?
Yeah, so I've attended all the public hearings that have already been talked about. Warner's Pond. I have to say the CMLP solar middle school presentation was really well done, I felt. The MIPA response to the Hanscom expansion has been released. And so now there are 30 days, I think, for the proponents to respond to that. And so, you know, there at some point, then we'll need to be ready to respond again. When I attended the same meeting that you're referring to on the Hanscom expansion, I did not necessarily in that arena hear an outcry for HATS to meet again, although HATS does need to revitalize itself. And now that this is on the table, so that's at least going to see what we can do. Lexington is in charge this year, and so we'll see if we can get this reactivated. But yeah, so I just the fact that the MIPA response has been released is something we now have to be on notice for.
Do you know how when we have to comment again? Do you know if it's going to be like a really short time frame again?
Don't know.
That's probably.
And it also depends on how the proponents are going to respond to.
They have like
MIPA
6
scope
months
request
to respond to write up this environmental impact report, right? They have at least 6 months to write it up or something.
I think they have 30 days now to respond to what.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very confusing process.
It is. Yep.
All right, Henry.
We went to the FinCom hearing on business last week for the Concord 250th for our review of our budget proposal for the coming fiscal year. And we ran into an issue with regard to the maintaining the level of free cash at the 5 to 10% level. And so we came away from that, and with some conversations with Kerry, we decided that we would would ask for the $500,000 that was from the allocated in the ARPA funds to the middle school solar project, which is not going to be expended this year, and apply that to our budget request for next year, so as not to have any impact on free cash. And that seemed to be a good solution. I had a nice talk with the chair of the HTC after the chair's breakfast about a week or two ago, and it seems that their only problem at this point is the constraints that are imposed on them by the antiquated statute that they work under, that makes it hard for them to make appointments and to move people from associates to full members, and of course the provision in the statute that requires 2 candidates to be proposed for each position, which has, as we have recognized ourselves, that has been ignored for years. But I think that the more important things to be worked on there are things that might affect their ability to make good decisions and have them be enforceable. So I'm going to be meeting with them in person to see what can be done to maybe streamline their operations. And now that we have some recent appointments on the HTC, I think that is breathing some new blood into the system. And I'm hopeful that we can, maintain a constructive relationship with the HDC. I've also been working with the Public Celebrations Committee, and there's new management there as of 2 weeks ago, which has been very constructive. And again, it's going to take some work to, to get things cleaned up there in terms of process and procedure. But in order to facilitate that, the new chair of the Public Celebrations Committee is going to come to the Concord 250 meeting on Thursday, and so that we can, make sure that things are all going in the same direction for everybody.
Okay.
Question on that, is it a final decision about the march of Concord for Ukraine? Have they made that? And there's no changing?
No decision has been made on any, and I don't know where.
No, for Patriots Day this
I
year.
know, no
Oh.
decision is the committee, the Celebrations Committee has not made any decisions on any of the people who
Oh.
filed applications
Oh, good.
to
Okay.
be in the parade. The deadline for filing is, I believe it's March 15th,
Oh,
and they're still soliciting participants. So
okay.
the fact is that what they have done, and there's some rough edges on the process, but the process was more or less arbitrary for years without really any definable standards, and they made a serious effort this year to actually come up with a more comprehensive set of criteria, which is helpful in making rational decisions, but there's always somebody who isn't happy with some aspect of it.
Mhm.
So we're working on that, and it's going to take some time. And it's a problem that it's a problem that affects a number of committees, is that the criteria on which they make their decisions, it's not unique to them. It's just sometimes you run into some people who have a strong investment in some particular point of view.
Okay, my committees last week included the school committee, where they discussed, well, it was an abbreviated meeting because it was originally intended to be in Boston, but the weather got in the way. Well, there's a process now where there are a couple of the board members that are from Boston, right? They're non-voting, but they are, the school
Oh,
committee
okay.
added those. And so another aspect of the process is to try to also meet
Got
there, so they actually still are committed to having a meeting in Boston in the spring. But the discussion was about the form of the superintendent's evaluation. So that's going to be done this year. It was not done last year. And then most of the time was spent on a new position that's being created called the Dean of Students at the high school. So that's an idea of having a position that's very much focused on the student wellness and coordination of programs for students. So sort of an inward focus as opposed to the outward focus of the principal. So, it's a new position.
Is that in place of what they used to call assistant principals they had at high schools?
I don't know.
No, I think they are
I think
also
it's
have it.
addition. I think
Yeah.
it's an
In
addition.
addition to the.
Yes. So, then there were, of course, discussions by the public school committee about the status of the middle school building process, which, of course, there was an approval by the town vote, and then the budget for this year. And so it's just really preparations leading up to the meetings that you've seen. Then we already talked through the DI Commission meeting that I attended. There was also a middle school building committee meeting where it was really it was pretty short. It was just kind of trying to prepare for this next phase where we will be issuing bids and getting bids. So, issuing the bid package and getting bids, leading up to town meeting. So, refinement of the schedule, refinement of the current cash flow was pretty quiet, this time and short. And I know there's one more that I'm missing here. Because I had meeting, there was the Warner Pond event that we've talked about. I had meeting every night last week. So, okay, I think that takes care of it though. And then that takes us to public comment. If you have a public comment, either if you're in the room, come up to the microphone. If you're on Zoom, use the raise hand feature and identify yourself and make your comment. I am not seeing anybody stepping up. So I think we can close the meeting for tonight. Thanks everyone who attended, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Or not next week, week after next, March 20th. March 20th, next week.